Money, world money. Buy honey a house, or buy honey by the jar. Buy bees to make honey. Never accept a wooden nickel or a phony $3 bill, or you will be soon parted from all your possessions. People make plans believing there are suckers born every minute. Born suckers, 3-card Monty. I bought the Brooklyn Bridge twice. The first guy had ripped me off. The Brooklyn Bridge was a bargain because I bought it after the Bretton Woods Agreement. I was working those bees because it's something I would do. Ask anyone that knows my highbrow poetry. My position is Bretton Woods was a money reset for hidden history. Mud flood was Armageddon style. Welcome, everybody, to Flat Earth Nation. It is a Flat Earth Nation. Mud flood was Armageddon. Don't let them tell you anything else unless they're willing to debate you in a fair and honest way. And I say that a lot, and I hope to say it a lot more, but until then, it has to stand that, there's already been a few people. I mean, there's been, at least I know of, 4 serious people who have predicted the end of the world since the voting in last November of 2020 for the Biden-Trump election. And so everybody keeps hanging on, and they go, oh, sometimes, oh, Paco, I like to listen to you and the Bible and stuff like that. But, what I'm trying to say is that they're all going to drop away. And eventually you're only going to be left with the truth. As people keep saying, it can't get any worse. There has to be the rapture. I'll still be here, or at least people will still be teaching this, that the rapture's over. And it's going to be there going like, well, I better take another look at it. And so I thought of a new term for, these, not the fireside chat at FDR, because he's going to play a big part of this whole Bretton Woods agreement and when we got off the gold standard and everything like that. But this is a new judgment fireside chat, trying to go to the judgment fireside chat. I like that. Gold is good. Make no mistake. Gold is good, they say, until you need a loaf of bread in a post-apocalyptic world's refugee camp. It's hard to make change if you go in there with a cougar hand and say, yeah, what do you do? So we're going to cover some of that and, what would you do? What can we learn from our earthly fathers? I hope, if this is the last time we touch on it, the Holy Spirit was insisting about putting this down because, our earthly fathers, our dads, what can we learn from them? Well, if your dad is anything like my dad, you can learn, a lot of good, some bad, but they were really, most of them didn't know that much about money. And they kind of got onto it after a while, but they make money and economics. It's hard to be played like a fiddle, with their planned inflation, deflations, and things like that, based on things like the Bretton Woods agreements. When did we leave the gold standard? How much did we find laying around after wars? But here's our fathers, some good, some bad. Our parents, we're to honor them. And maybe some were better with money than my parents were. I know that Tommy's parents were better with their money than my parents were. Sometimes people get a tendency to think that the money's always just going to be flowing in. But now, as these natural disasters have ramped up, whatever, I believe it's God's judgment. Some people believe it's climate change. Some people just believe, hey, it happens. There is, as long as we don't call it climate by man-induced climate change, then they'll go like, yeah, it's bad, man. We've had some bad storms, but that's part of that political separation. But what we know is money is the root of all kinds of evil. So we've got that going. I want to say hola to my good friend. You talk about a working man, he working hard for the money. This is a show about money, something that he'll appreciate more than most because he's worked harder than most, in my humble opinion, because I've only done that. Not only is Luther the Truther, he's Luther the Truther, a roofer. Oh man, now it's happening. Now it is a real Bible study. Glyph is in the house. Brother, you might have just missed my monologue, but we're going to be talking about money, gold, going off the gold standard. I think the Lord has directed me to tie in Tartaria and everything, the recent reset right there to Bretton Woods. Well, I think I've shared the screen to just show you how important it is. I'm going to cheat and go forward to not that one, not that one, not this one. Yeah, this one. I want to make sure I got the volume turned up here. Am I sharing the screen? Yep. Listen up, Glyph and Luther.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserves.
What? Maybe we better hear this again, because you didn't know I was getting this serious right off the bat.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Are you one of those separators? Are you one of those guys that are a separator somehow of gold? Well, there's laws there since that August 15th, 1971, that whatever you do with your gold always has to be in the best interest of the United States. Well, now what if we're finding out, and we are, that the whole reason in Bretton Woods agreements is where the United States, because they had all the gold in Fort Knox stored for people during World War II in that emergency, they'd all be based on the US dollar, backed on that gold. In August 15th, 1971, the Bretton Woods Agreement, and there were a number of them, were exposed as fraud perpetrated by the United States, and that we didn't have that much gold, and that there is no gold or silver standard anymore, and that we had started debasing our silver coins in 1964, and that they didn't have real silver. And then in the 90s, it just gets worse when they tested some gold that was bought from Fort Knox or paid a debt, was later tested, and it turned out to be tungsten steel, the only thing that weighs the same as gold, with just, quarter of an inch of gold around the bricks. This has been a swindle from the beginning. I put a link in there if anybody wants to hop on. Otherwise, let's get going. A lot to go over. Acts 17 reminds us about that silver. So if it's in a, and they were carried back to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of silver from the sons of Hamor of Shechem. So that's obviously a pretty important part. It's mentioned in the Old Testament, as we see. Most of you have already heard about it. Here's the whole deal, I think. Sarah's death, and she was precious. And here in verse 8, because he's looking for a term. Well, let's go back to verse 5. Abraham says, I need to bury my wife. I really thought the world of her. Genesis 23, verse 5, the Hittites answered Abraham, hear us, my Lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. And we all know what those are like in our now mud flood aware world. Man, I hear my dog barking out there. I'm going to have to pause for just 1 second. Maybe I can turn the microphone off. Hopefully that'll get him back in here. But verse 6, hear us, my Lord, you are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of tomb. We all know what kind of nice tombs those are in mud flood world in their star fort cities. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land, and he said to them, if you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me, Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns. It is at the end of his field for the full price. Let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place. Now, Ephraim was sitting there. This is a planned meeting. This is going to the gates of the city. We know that those star fort cities had amazing, court systems, and they like their pomp and circumstances. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all of who went in at the gate of the city. No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, but if you will hear me, I give the price of the field. Accept it from me that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, my Lord, listen to me. a piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver? What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. Because they've always had them, and God required fair balances, fair weights and measures on those balances, so that he really does is a God that cares about not getting ripped off. And let's face it, if you missed the opening reading where I thought I got a pretty good grip on that about that. That was funny. Wish you would have been here. But anyway, current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron in Machpelah, which was to the east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it and all the trees that were in the field throughout its whole area, was made over. Now, I don't like this interpretation, so we'll look at it later. Made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over, there's that term I don't like again, to Abraham as property for a burying place to the Hittites. Now look, even the New International Version gets it right. The word means deed, deeded. It was something Starford people did. It's what helps us make sense of God being the just and the justifier, and why I hate the common usage of the word I just got this inkling, no, wait, that's the proper usage of it. But there's all types of people that use the word just wrong all the time. That infuriates me. It's a trigger thing. And here it was like the English Standard Version. It's good and on a lot of stuff, but not this time. It's not made over. Berean Bible Study gets it right. It was deeded, legal deeded by all of their witnesses, written down on paper, the offer and the offer made. Don't you love the way that Ephron goes like, no, I want to give it to you. Not that it's worth 400 pieces of silver. Who knows? They didn't barter or anything. He just said 400 it is, 400 it is. Am I beating that dead horse? Look at even the New American Standard, my wife's favorite version. You know that they don't use the word prostitute in that, or the word whore. Passed from, that's not that good. Made sure, that's just not a good part. What does Young say? And we'll move on. Yeah. Established are the field. Vague. So I was looking up the king of Tyre, and we're going to look at Ithbaal, because he's mentioned in Ezekiel 28. But these kings of Tyre, these were their gods. They're the ones that now are portrayed as Persian and Assyrian gods. But look at this one here. Ithobal 1, that was the father of Jezebel. We know about her. She married Ahab. He's bad. They're bad. They're the kings of Tyre. They're the ones that built all of the temples. That's who built Solomon's temples of hewn stone. Or was it hewn stone? We'll find out. There's different ways to make money. But this Ishbaal the 3, we're not going to look at Jezebel's daddy. A little bit further down the line, when Ezekiel was dealing with the cherub in Eden, because this King Tyre goes much deeper. King Tyre goes much deeper. He is a type of Satan, so we can get a picture of what we've been finding out. This could be all about Jesus came to earth to deal with the sin of the devil. And we were, looks like the whole world's caught up in that now. So Ithobal 3 was recorded not only by Josephus. He can put out a lot of good information, but he doesn't tell the whole truth at all. He's on the list of the kings of Tyre. They're gods. And he reigned at this pivotal point in history at the time of the first fall of Jerusalem. And therefore, the subject of Ezekiel's cherub in Eden. During this time, Josephus also wrote that Nebuchadnezzar besieged Tyre for 13 years. And those sieges, they always end bad. The city, according to the oracles of Ezekiel, was not captured. Ithobal himself survived the siege, with the prophet acknowledging that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon made his army labor hard against Tyre, yet neither he nor his army got anything. Interesting. Now, it's not only Tertullian and Marcion who links, the reference to a fall of Satan as that cherub, Ezekiel's cherub in Eden. And I think that you'll agree, not just with me, but with what is intuitive behavior. Intuitive understanding. The cherub of Eden is a figure mentioned in Ezekiel 28, verses 13 and 14. Many translations, including the New International Version, identify the cherub with the king of Tyre. Specifically, Ithobal number 3, the great-grandson of Jezebel's the whore, according to the list of the kings in Josephus. But as it's confirmed in the Bible, we're gonna have to say this was common knowledge. Ezekiel has cited Eden in 2 extensive passages and portrayed the king of Tyre in terms of the cherub, or something created in Eden. The city is famed for the temple complex of Melkart. with its renowned garden enclosure. These are 400 of these will buy you a field to bury your dead wife if you lived back then. Nice phoenix. Asian much? You put your right foot out, you put your right foot in. So they existed too. These are real things because we're still living in Bible times, man. This still happened. It's still there. As a matter of fact, it happened a lot more recently than most people let on. They act like they don't know. Where is the actual chapter? You might want to ask. It's right here. Man, that is not it. I must have just figured I'd pull it up. We'll go with the Berean study since I'm mad at the ESV right now. Oh, shoot. What was I looking up? Oh, Ezekiel 28. That's the prophet Ezekiel. So we got this as a prophecy against the ruler of Tyre. And the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, tell the ruler of Tyre that this is what the Lord God says. Your heart is proud. And you have said, I am God. I sit in the seat of gods in the heart of the sea. Yet you are a man and not a god, though you have regarded your heart as that of a god. Behold, you are wiser than Daniel. No secret is hidden from you. By your wisdom and understanding, you have gained your wealth and amassed gold and silver for your treasuries. By your great skill in trading, you have increased your wealth, but your heart has grown proud because of it. Now, that's kind of where the analogy breaks down a little bit, because was there a hint of somehow Satan, wanted a type of currency for his, glorious reflecting abilities or whatever people come to the assumption? There was a falling out. We know that. So, that's hard for us to imagine, right? That this was because of, that this ties into Satan, but I think it does, and a lot of other people do too. And it sure fits with the whole proud heart thing. He really was wiser than Daniel. Well, that Daniel was pretty smart. That's his heart grew proud. Verse 6, Ezekiel 28, verse 6, therefore this is what the Lord God says. Because you regard your heart as the heart of a god, behold, I will bring foreigners against you, the most ruthless of nations. They will draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom and will defile your splendor. They will bring you down to the pit. That's a capital P pit. That's a God-inspired pit. That's why they do that. And you will die a violent death in the heart of the seas. Verse 9, will you still say, I am a God in the presence of those who slay you? You will be only a man, not a God, in the hands of those who wound you. You will die the death of the uncircumcised at the hands of foreigners, for I have spoken, declares the Lord God. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lament for the king of Tyre, and tell him that this is what the Lord God says. Now, here's where it gets kind of tricky. I'm going to change my location. I'm going to get that carpal tunnel disease. This is what the Lord God says. This is why most people lean towards this we're talking about Satan's fall right now, more than the physical king of Tyre who built the temple for Solomon. It says in the second half of verse 11, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every kind of precious stone adorned you. He names a bunch of them here. Rubies, topaz, onyx, beryl, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, emerald. Well, you recognize most of those precious, and that precious means valuable, I think. It goes on to say that those jewels, your mountings and settings were crafted in gold, back to the gold, prepared on the day of your creation. This gold was made for the creation of this one who was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, just keeping it real. Verse 14, you were anointed as the guardian cherub. So now the point comes here. Why don't other people believe this is talking about Satan? Why do they always drive us to, Isaiah chapters 14 through 17 instead of realizing that, no, they're talking obviously about, this is fall of Satan's stuff here. All about having to do with something to do with the money. Verse 14, we're going to start it again because, don't even get me started on the fiery stones. Oh, too late. These fiery stones. The first article out the gate will say, go back to 28 and 16. You were the anointed cherub who covers, I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones, and you sinned. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Many commentaries completely misunderstand this entire passage and wrongfully assume that a human king is being addressed here. Based on this false assumption, their interpretation of the fiery stones is equally as wrong. They have a booklet explaining it. Trust me now, I don't believe I've ever looked at this, but it goes on to say in this book, they're addressing Lucifer or Satan, showing that the Bible addresses here Satan, not a human being. And they have a quote. The Bible reveals that God created all the angels. They were not created as robots, but as spirit beings with the power to choose and to decide. One high-ranking angel, a cherub by the name of Lucifer, rebelled and sinned against God. Isaiah 14 chapter, and its verses are 12 through 15. We read about the same thing in Ezekiel 28. And then it continues. Lucifer wanted to ascend to heaven to dethrone God. Isaiah 14, verse 13. He wanted to ascend above the heights of the cloud. Isaiah 14, verse 14. This shows us that he was here on earth because he wanted to ascend above the clouds of the earth to go to heaven. When he sinned, he was thrown back to this earth. Isaiah 14, verse 12, he became Santa Claus. I'm just seeing if you're paying attention. He became Satan, which means enemy or adversary. Lucifer or Satan was already here on earth. There you are, good boy. Good, lay down. Lucifer or Satan was already here on earth when Adam and Eve was created. Well, we can vouch for that part of the story. Continuing, we are told that the serpent was already here in order to deceive Eve. Well, yeah. You just said that so that you're redundant on that sentence, but it's okay. I like it. In order to deceive Eve, especially what you did with that. When Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden. The serpent is identified as Satan the devil, Revelation 12, verse 9. Since Satan appeared to the first man and his wife as the deceiver, he must have lived on this earth prior to man as Lucifer, yet he was not the deceiver before he tried to ascend to heaven. There. Take that, everybody who thought I was the only one who could beat a dead horse. This guy is taking the cake. He's still going on about it. Actually, before he was sent to earth, Lucifer had been trained in heaven before the very throne of, come on now. Yeah. In Hebrew, the word translated as Lucifer in the King James Version and in many others is Hillel or Halel, which means light bringer, shining one's morning star, or shining star of the dawn. The word Lucifer, that light bearer, is the Latin translation of the word Hillel or Halel, conveying exactly the same meaning. It is therefore appropriate to use this word in describing the cherub who later became Satan, the prince of darkness, still ruling on this earth. Well, once again ruling on this earth in my world. And if you don't believe it now, you will when you know you've waited for your last rapture thing and you go, I got to look at something else, because you can't just leave the Lord. And once you've heard this, you can't unhear it. Compare also your questions and answers addressing the parallelism between the Prince of Tyre, the end-time false prophet, and the king of Tyre, Satan. Well, there's one. He's got some information. So we're going to leave that open. If we can get back to that, doesn't that sound intriguing? He's got some information trying to tie in Tyre with the end-time prophet. You know, we think that he's already in the lake of fire. But if he makes a good argument, a lot of people are always asking me, well, who was the beast and the false prophet? And I'm always going like, Nero? You know, but I don't go like, it was Nero. So I like the king of Tyre because that guy, you know, was a real person. And then his grandson would have been a backstabber, just like Solomon's Tyre, the guy who dealt with Solomon. That king of Tyre turned out to be a backstabber and money grabber. And that's who they're talking about here in Ezekiel 28. We're going to pick it right back up like we never even saw those other things, like we never read that. Like we never read that from Wikipedia. We'll just keep reading it here. You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for I had ordained you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the fiery stones. That's where we started that last rabbit trail. From the day you were created, you were blameless in your ways until wickedness was found in you. Now here it gets back to the money thing. Verse 16, by the vastness of your trade, you were filled with violence and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mountain of God, and I banished you, O guardian cherub. This is all starting to sound familiar, right? From among the fiery stones, your heart grew proud of your beauty. Well, I wouldn't know what that was like, but I can see it sometimes in some other people. And other people that, they know that they're kind of like that. They're kind of like the pretty ones, they got to fight it. They have to fight it. And if you're like one of those pretty ones, you got to fight it. Otherwise, your heart may grow proud. This is not a sermon about you. This is a sermon about this gold stuff. It's Satan right now in verse 17. Satan's heart. He was told outright, your heart grew proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I cast you to the earth. I made you a spectacle before kings. By the multitude of your iniquities and the dishonesty of your trading, you have profaned your sanctuary. So I made fire come from within you. That's that spontaneous combustion, and it consumed you, because we are all batteries ran by electricity, magnets in a vortex. Accidents are going to happen once you've been double crossed by this no good Satan. Pretty good, huh? We're going to start at verse 18 again. By the multitude of your iniquities and of your trading, you have profaned your sanctuaries. So I made fire come from within you, and it consumed you. I reduced you to ashes on the ground in the eyes of all who saw you. All the nations who know you are appalled over you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Sidon and prophesy against her. This might be like a cohort with Satan who just got schooled, as they say in your modern vernaculars. Sidon, what's up with him? He's going to get prophesied against her, it says. Set your face against Sidon and prophesy against her. And you are to declare, this is what the Lord God says. Behold, I am against you, O Sidon, and I will be glorified within you. They will know that I am the Lord when I execute judgments against her and demonstrate my holiness through her. I will, oh man, no. Not the plague stuff again. Can the Holy Spirit help me through a sermon without the plague thing? The plague thing, the plague. Verse 23, I will send a plague against her and shed blood in her streets. The slain will fall within her while the sword is against her on every side. Then they will know that I am the Lord. For the people of Israel will no longer face a prickling briar. That's pricking briar. See, I added the L because it's sticky in it, but it's, pricking sounds too PG-13. Or a painful briar thorn. from all around them who treat them with contempt. Then they will know that I am the Lord. That is a commonly recurring theme, that you must constantly be knowing that he is the Lord. Then you're out of trouble. Then you'll be able to keep your eyes on the Lord. Verse 25, this is what the Lord God says: when I gather the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they have been scattered, I will show myself holy among them in the sight of the nations. Then they will dwell in their own land, which I have given to my servant Jacob. He had his name changed to Israel. And there they will dwell securely, build houses and plant vineyards. They will dwell securely when I execute judgments against all those around them who treat them with contempt. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. That'd be nice. So there, while the very end is going on, that's what I'm going to teach off of this, is that there will be some people going like, we don't need your 5G to run a computer. I guess they can make computers out of water. We'd like to come back to that possibly. Here, what is these Masoretic texts you're always hearing about? Sometimes I say, at least the King James Version used the right text. Well, those are the Masoretic texts. So they got their own web page. Check that out. The Leningrad Codex. Okay, so that's a good one. There's your oldest complete manuscript. No wonder everybody's going like, yeah, man, I dig it. This one's a good one. These towns had, some good ones, and there are some good parts of the Septuagint. I'll admit that. It's not all a trick like some other things. Hey, this is a good one. Looks funny. Looks like their writing's a little different, but it's still good. But just don't, you don't pay attention to what they wrote in the margins. We don't need their note keeping. And, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. We keep finding them, They can't deny these. That's why when they had the Dead Sea Scrolls, they had to keep saying they found these other things with them. Once they found them, they knew how to fake it. And of course, when were the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered? Well, right after the last reset of World War II. World War II-ism, as opposed to Pollyanna-ism. Tommy was telling me about Pollyanna-ism this morning. It's a dream world that people live in right now with their mammon. The mammon loving Pollyanna dream world, dummy heads, as that one girl said in a movie. Sick. A lot of just sectarian stuff about how they lived back in the day in their star forged cities, but they keep you away from that. Didn't I have some sort of a show going on here?
And Saul approved of his execution. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him.
So that's where the Christians took off, man. What's this one? Look, I'm sharing. Hey, look. million, 2.3 million subscribers. Oh, I got to slide this down here now. I made that through all of the pre-show stuff. I want to thank you guys for sticking around, everybody. And here's the, did you know you've made the mainstream when one of these people put out a video about it? You know, and this is big Patreon stuff, you know. 2 million things. And in case you ever hear anything, you know, what is the truth about Tartaria? This video we're going to start with today, I don't know, I don't think I should play that much of it because these guys are, at least not the volume, are big copyright freaks. But they're basically, after they get done explaining their game, it basically is a video to explain away, you know, Tartaria and the mud flood to people. So we can read some of their comments. You know, there's a, you know, new conspiracy, and they've incorporated into it a massive empire called Great Tartaria or Tartary, you know, depending on, you know, what conspiracy type of thing you're looking at, you know, the chronology. So they're basically getting ready to have people be like, you're going to hear about this. And when you do, they run to the people with the millions of subscribers. So this has to be a concerted effort. And so they give their version of what is Tartary and call us myth makers. And, you know, they tell you what they think it is.
And Eastern Europe, while others argue that the rulers of Great Tartaria were white people or sometimes even giants. What specifically brings down Great Tartaria is vague. Some of the commenters have Europeans, usually the...
So you see, it basically is telling the whole thing. Sometimes they blame the Europeans. Sometimes they blame these people. That's what they're telling people we do. And they're getting tons more, you know, a lot more than me, but a lot more than John Levy, Conspiracy R Us, or any of the people we consider getting a lot. They have felt the urge where they have to get the word out there. That's important to me, and it should be to you.
Truthers have pointed out, cartographers from across Europe marked massive swathes of Asia as Tartary, Grand Tartaria, and other variations of the term.
So what's the problem? They say that Tartaria was simply a European name to refer to most of Asia. Well, that's what we're saying. And we're saying that in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, all of Asia fell away from Paul. That's the true time schedule when all this happened. That's when Great Tartaria split, or it might have been splitting when the world was being turned upside down for Christ. But it certainly wasn't in the 13th century. Please.
Were sometimes included in it as well. More ambitious, though inaccurate maps even included India. However, it is never a political term, but a geographic one.
So, Mongols, Khan, Attila the Hun, it's all of these things. They have Ethiopia colored because it was a part of it. Same with the Mameluke, the Marmaduke. They're selling you out, preparing you, but you can know
and with sparse mentions in the works of Central Asian geographers or Chinese dynastic sources in the following centuries. It reached its widest audience, so to speak, during the Mongol Empire. Generally speaking, sources from outside of the Mongol Empire, especially in the first half of the 13th century, such as Arabic, Persian.
Okay, so there you go, all the way over to the Eastern Occidental Oriental region of what they're saying is Jerusalem today, in that area, because that is considered the Orient. The Hebrews were and are and always have been considered Oriental. Maybe this is one of those times to do that look it up thing. It says the descendants of Joktan are sometimes referred to as the Oriental Hebrews. Antioch, Peleg's clan made two Hebrew peoples, the Western Hebrews of Western Asia and the Eastern Hebrews of East Asia. Orientals are Hebrew people. Were the Hebrews Asian? Technically, yes. I thought it'd be about Asians, but it's not. What a ripoff. I'm playing a commercial for them. Yikes. But yeah, they are. They're Asian. Did you guys knew that already? I know. Get into some more slander about you good people believing in mud flood. Mongols are called Tartars. Let's find out what excuse he's making.
Mongols, whom we call Tartars. The trend reached its apogee in the later 13th and 14th.
Look at all this area up here. What was that? That was Tartaria too on those other maps. So please.
Centuries. Then, in government sources associated with the Toluid Mongol dynasties, first with Great Khan Mongke, then the Yuan in China and Ilkhanate in Iran, Mongol becomes the catch-all term for the state and people, with Tatar reduced to a single rebellious tribe in eastern Mongolia.
Oh, please. So this is how they're trying to sell it to all these people? Cartoon avatars? What do you expect from a 2 million subscribers? I expect more.
The Golden Horde's population, made up of Tatars who moved there during the Great Invasion under Batu.
So this is what this is why we have to prepare. I think it's an honor that, that we've arrived. They've singled it out, Check it out. Let's see how they wrap it up.
Which would often lazily refer to vast tracts of Asia as Tataria. Any supporter of the Tatarian myth must ask the question, which is more likely, that some faceless organization completely erased the history of a vast Tatarian empire archaeologically and in sources across the breadth of Asia in hundreds of languages, and replaced its existence with made-up dynasties, polities, and empires, but was unable to erase its presence from maps.
Hey, look, California's an island. They just got this from France because they didn't know it was part of Tartary. Things were happening fast here because they already had the desert as a Sahara. This is a faked up map, big time. It's an honor to have them pick us out.
Which can be found in books purchased easily from your local bookshop, or that European map makers simply stuck with convention and referred to much of Asia as Tartaria because of its association with Tartars and Mongols. No shortage of peoples from around the world can attest to Europeans' tendencies to care little for the accuracy of colonial-era naming conventions. Just ask the Indians who live in North America.
Oh man, they got it all figured out.
Belief in the state of Great Tartary rests entirely on taking European map-making as the single highest, most reliable form of evidence of the last few centuries, and reducing all other sources to forgeries, barring those few excerpts which can be removed from there.
Well, I'll tell you what. It's not us truthers that have a history of faking history. We just woke up one day and found ourselves researching, are these people lying to them? And finding out, wow, they're lying about everything. So it's not on us. They're the ones that get busted lying about everything. And now they've lied about the gold and the governments. And so now it's time to get into, I think we're going to get into what is a little bit of background on the Bretton Woods Agreement. Look at that. I just pulled this video up to do the show on it.
Atchison, Truman's future Secretary of State, described it. He said that those assumptions had been based on, quote unquote, misconceptions of the state of the world around us, both in anticipating post-war conditions and in recognizing what they actually were when we came face to face with them. Only slowly did it dawn upon us that the whole world structure and order that we had inherited from the 19th century was gone. And that
I just thought that was a great way to start it. That we inherited it, and they had to admit everything they inherited from the 1800s was gone. So they had to fake a war, fake a history, do a rewrite, grab the gold, get it on, bang a gong. We're waiting on Gog and Magog, and you better be ready in your mind on how you're waiting. We'll hear this one more time. I don't want to play too much of his stuff, but we got to have this.
Only slowly did it dawn upon us that the whole world structure and order that we had inherited from the 19th century was gone, and that the struggle to replace it would be directed from two bitterly opposed and ideologically irreconcilable power centers. So what are the pillars of the U.S. post-war vision now? First, Britain is no geopolitical rival. Britain is a desperate ally that needs to be saved from imminent collapse and a potential communist takeover. Two, the Soviets can no longer be co-opted, but in George Kennan's famous word, needed to be contained. Three, West Germany would be turned into the Western bulwark against Soviet expansion. Germans would be rehabilitated, and West Germany would be turned into the industrial center of a new integrated Western Europe being very much an American geopolitical concept. And finally, the whole idea of an IMF trying to
the International Monetary Fund. International Monetary Fund.
Support a dollar-starved world through short-term loans.
They had a dollar-starved world at the end of World War II. There's too few dollars to go around. They were dollar-starved. You can't eat the dollar bills.
That's all ditched. Truman mothballs the IMF entirely, and it's replaced with the Marshall Plan.
So anyway, let's get back to what they were doing. I want to get his introduction, if I can. Stop looking at the 666.
And FDR very much had them in mind, and what he considered to be Woodrow Wilson's biggest failing. The fact that he had failed to bring along Republicans in the Senate behind his League of Nations. And FDR was determined he wouldn't make the same mistake. New Hampshire happened to have a Republican Senator, Charles Tobey, who was going to be in a very tough primary battle in the autumn. The Democrats felt they had no chance to take that seat, but he figured that if he helped Tobey out, and Tobey was renowned for being an enemy of international institutions, he might not only convert Tobey, but might bring Tobey along to convert some of his fellows, and that's exactly how things played out. So that was the main reason why Bretton Woods was chosen. Now, FDR had no interest in international monetary affairs. I mean, not the details of them in that regard. He was very similar to Winston Churchill, who, interestingly enough, in his 5-volume memoirs on the war, mentions the great economist John Maynard Keynes only once, even though Keynes played a major diplomatic role during the war. FDR's Treasury, however, were the ones who scripted the conference, and they were what you might characterize as economic determinists. This is Henry Morgenthau, the Treasury Secretary. He's an old friend of FDR's from Hyde Park, New York. He knows nothing about economics, describes himself as an apple farmer, a gentleman apple farmer, but an apple farmer nonetheless. But he's very reliant on his deputy, a truly remarkable figure that I'll talk some about, Harry Dexter White.
So yeah, we're gonna have to look this guy up, Harry Dexter White. Boy, they just say he came out of nowhere and he fought. Of course, I'm no fan of. They talk about Keynes or Keynesian. They prop him up, of course, because he was a known homosexual. But that's getting ahead of the story here.
Manage a global dollar-based system with gold as its foundation. The dollar would be fixed to gold at a fixed price. And why did the U.S. Treasury in the 1940s view fixed exchange rates as being in the national interest, whereas today we constantly badger countries, in particular China, to unpeg their currencies from the dollar? Well, in the 1940s, all the market pressure on the U.S. dollar was upward, so that when countries fixed their currencies to the U.S. dollar, that helped the United States maintain a more competitive currency. Roughly speaking, over the past 10 years, most of the market pressure on the US dollar vis-a-vis key emerging market currencies, particularly China's renminbi, has been downward. So when countries do the same thing, fix their currencies to the US dollar, it makes it more difficult for the United States to achieve a more competitive dollar. So that's why we changed our position on that matter. Now, why was
we changed our position on the matter for a different reason? Where is that one? I like this guy here. Oh no, it was Zeitgeist Addendum.
population.
I thought. Where is that one that I had, man, that showed John F. or Richard Nixon? It's worth it. Is this it?
The man caught between his own death and the knowledge that his life meant either the freedom or enslavement of the majority.
Look at this, a mud flood thing, but that's not it. But we're gonna get back to why they needed the Bretton Woods Agreement and how the United States was basically, doing some one-upsman on Great Britain. This Bretton Woods stole everything. I can't emphasize it enough that they lost within 2 weeks of when this went down. Great Britain was poor. They had no money. They had to do this, and they still didn't have enough money to fund an army in India. So all of their colonies, that's when Great Britain all of a sudden stood its head around going like, hey, we bought some Harrier jump jets. They became a nothing. And look at them now, right before the very end. They've become nothing because for a little while, the merger between the United States and the Nazis, that Germany, when they did that in World War II, they faked that they had the Nazi gold. They found all this gold. The other gold stored at Fort Knox has been exposed. See my last night's video or whatever it is. But yeah, we're on them. We're on them like that proverbial white on rice.
Rest of the world even interested in this creation. Well, in the 1940s, there was no other way to trade and therefore to survive in the world other than barter without gold or US dollars. And
that was only 1945, everybody. This is a recent reset. You couldn't survive without a US dollar or gold. And as I said in my opening monologue, how easy is it to make change if you're in a post-apocalyptic world and you only want to buy a loaf of bread and you got a gold coin? I would change, Mr. Bandit Man.
The United States controlled nearly 80% of the world's monetary gold stock at the time. So the rest of the world was really there at Bretton Woods to find out what the United States was going to do about this problem. This was not a kumbaya moment. This was the moment where the United States would explain to the world how it was going to manage the immediate crisis that was going to take place after the war.
And if you think there was an immediate crisis after the war, see the videos from the last couple of nights, there's parts in them about this that explain. We faked that gold. That gold at Fort Knox has been exposed most recently as 1998 and confirmed in 2016 with just recent papers that have been discovered from the military intelligence of Vienna.
When it would be impossible to restart trade with the U.S. Controlling 80% of the world's monetary reserves without some architecture to ensure at least liquidity when countries got into balance of payments difficulties, which they inevitably would. Why was the United States able to entice everybody over to Bretton Woods? Well, here's how Harry Dexter White explained it to the American delegates. He said it was gold in Fort Knox. He said it was why the United States was, quote, in such a powerful position at this conference. It's why we dominate the financial world. If only England was in that position, it would be a very different story. Harry Dexter White was a man who was literally obsessed with the relative economic and political positions of the United States and Great Britain. He was, since his earliest days, in government. When he arrives at the U.S. Treasury in 1934, really as no more than a bureaucratic temp, he rolls from short-term contract to short-term contract.
He rolled from short-term contract to short-term contract.
He's already planning an international conference. In 1935, for example,
The man that did the short-term contract was planning an international conference as early as 1935. That's counterintuitive.
it's the key figure who persuades the Chinese, rather ruthlessly, to unpeg their currency from
Oh, wait, and now we want them to unpeg it because we're the debtor nation and we think China's ripping us off and we don't like their death by 1,000 cuts. But I don't know when the last time I've been wrong about this kind of stuff is. I know I've been wrong before as a sinner, but I'm teaching this stuff for a reason, and either this theology will be alive, which it will have to be, because there will be a camp of saints encompassed about in this coming battle of Gog and Magog. No man knows the day or the hour or the week, but it's going down in 2046. It will still be here until then.
sterling and to peg it to the US dollar. And he moves steadily on this front as we go forward into the 1940s. I found a memo in his archives dated 1936 in which he writes, quote, the more sterling countries there are in the world, the more countries that use the pound sterling or have their currencies linked to the pound sterling, the stronger will be England's position around a conference table should an international conference take place. So 8 years before Bretton Woods, he's already planning an international conference, even though he's, again, no more than a bureaucratic temp at this point at the U.S. Treasury, and it's going to be a conference.
He was no more than a temp at the bureaucratic agency, the international planner, that guy.
At which the United States, and in particular Harry Dexter White, bests the British. Many in the FDR administration consider the United States to be the great anti-colonial power in the world. And Harry Dexter White always viewed economics as being a means to political ends. He never viewed it as being an end in itself. He, in fact, told a friend at Stanford during his second attempt at an undergraduate degree when he was 30 years old.
Because he was a temp from an agency. He needed a degree, so he got one. That's what those temps do when you plan an international Bretton Woods agreement. Going to take away the gold. America's in charge. We lied. We had fake gold, but we thought there was one born every minute.
He had an epiphany of sorts. He realized, as he put it, that most governmental problems were fundamentally economic. This is why I decided to stick with economics.
The temp had an epiphany. That means he had a vision from God.
So Bretton Woods was very much, in Harry Dexter White's mind, a key tool in eliminating Great Britain as a political and economic rival in the post-war world. Henry Morgenthau, after FDR died, explained to President Truman what it was he had set out to achieve at Bretton Woods. He said, quote, I wanted to move the financial center of the world from London and Wall Street to the United States Treasury. Note the on Wall Street part. This is very much an anti-banker New Deal agenda, writ global. And London, of course, is a key part of this. At Bretton Woods, he tells them,
I just can't emphasize enough how important the Bretton Woods Agreement is. This guy is one of those compartmentalized financial people working for the bad guys. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just spouting off the numbers going like, hey, guess what I found in a book? And they let him print it, exposing themselves so that we can know.
Was that FDR, as most of you are aware, had little time for the opinions of his cabinet, but he would listen to Morgenthau because Morgenthau was a friend. But Morgenthau was not the sharpest tack in the box. He didn't have any original ideas of his own. These ideas all came from one man, including on foreign policy. White was enormously influential in foreign policy during the Second World War. And Keynes understood this. For White's part,
Keynes was a homosexual. And everybody loved him because he was so smart, even at a time when it was against the law to be a homosexual. And this guy, the temporary agency, chose him out and said, I'm going to get that guy and we're going to be in charge. And it came down to a battle over Keynes' opinion. I'm setting the stage for you.
He worshipped Keynes as a thinker. He used to get himself literally physically sick before he would go into negotiations with Keynes because he didn't want to humiliate himself in front of his colleague.
I don't want to be humiliated in this smart homosexual's presence. I'm going to throw up.
When the two would come together for a negotiating session, you can almost feel in their discourse the disparity in their backgrounds and their consciousness of it. One point in a particularly explosive episode in October of 1943, Keynes takes a new draft from White, throws it on the ground and yells, "This is intolerable. It is yet another Talmud." Keynes was very conscious of the fact that White was Jewish. His top deputies, Eddie Bernstein, for example, were Jewish. Of course, Morgenthau himself was Jewish. To which White responds, "We will try to produce some highness."
I got to admit, I don't understand why anybody would want to, be like, I'm a Jew, like we're those guys that we chose Barabbas. Just makes no sense.
I should emphasize that Keynes was an internationalist, but he was fundamentally an internationalist Englishman. He was an Englishman at heart. And there is no way that he would have proposed Bangor at Bretton Woods if he had believed that there was some way to salvage Sterling's dominant international role. But that was out of the question at that point. So really you're in a situation where the rival of my rival's currency is my friend. So that's where Bangor comes from. And of course,
because as they say, love will give you a thrill, but love will not pay your bill. You need money. Yeah, money. That's what I want. That's what I want.
Of course, White will have none of it. Keynes is extremely astute in understanding the situation that he and Great Britain are in. He explains to the British government in the early 1940s that British freedom to engineer new post-war social and economic policies was, quote unquote, impossible without further American assistance. The country's room for maneuver was painfully limited. He says, the Americans are strong.
It is time to pay the piper. America lied about how much gold it had. Too far. It lied, and now it's time to pay the piper that that gold was fake. But we were in charge for a little while.
a duplicate copy of the plates. Everyone involved in the debate within the administration, in particular Alvin Hall, who was head of the Bureau of Engraving, was against this. But there was really an authority vacuum here because Morgenthau had no interest in the subject. In April of 1944,
Morgenthau was Jewish.
General Marshall cables from Europe after he hears about this debate and says, well, if you decide to go forward with this idea of giving the plates to the Soviets, essentially, please don't do it until after May 1st. White completely mischaracterizes this memorandum and tells his colleagues that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have ordered that the plates be turned over to the Soviets. Soviets take the plates, print up 78 billion occupation marks. This is more than 8 times what the United States prints up. They cash these occupation marks in Washington, D.C. at the fixed exchange rate established.
That's how you fund communism. Did you miss how you fund the communism?
If you decide to go forward with this idea of giving the plates to the Soviets, essentially, please don't do it until after May 1st. White completely mischaracterizes this memorandum and tells his colleagues that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have ordered that the plates be turned over to the Soviets. Soviets take the plates, print up 78 billion occupation marks. This is more than 8 times what the United States prints up. They cash these occupation marks in Washington, D.C. at the fixed exchange rate established by Harry Dexter White and effectively raid the U.S. Treasury for, in current dollars, $4.5 to $6 billion. And the archival evidence is clear that White knew this was going to happen. In fact, argued to his colleagues that if the Soviets would profit from this transaction, all the better. They were doing heroic things, and we needed to show our appreciation. Again, this is I want to emphasize this.
Harry Dexter White thought they were doing heroic things, and we funded the USSR. They're back in the USSR.
This is not a man who ever thought of himself as operating against American. He was a man who believed that he knew what America.
So what we're finding out is that these Montagues and everybody else, they were spying. The whole Bretton Woods Agreement, not only did we use fake gold, but then we gave the information as a way to prop up the commies. And we wonder why there was a John Birch Society in the CIA. I'm not talking to myself. I want to say hello to Edna Bell. I see she's the first new comment in quite a while. Thank you for that. Peace and love. We're talking money.
Interests were, and it was American isolationists who were holding the country back. I would liken him, perhaps it helps in a modern context, to somebody like Jonathan Pollard, who almost certainly did.
Another man who spied for what they call Israel. Jonathan Pollard, convicted spy. Worked for the United States, spied for Israel.
Didn't view himself as operating for Israel against the United States, but believed that U.S. policy was misguided and that the United States should have been doing more for Israel. Likewise, people like Harry Dexter White viewed the Soviets as being allies and believed passionately that they needed to be treated as allies. And
Harry Dexter White was a temp, contract worker going temp to temp to temp, but he still planned this meeting with all of these things and he got it done, man. But we lied. That was fake money at Fort Knox, and now we're exposed and we've become the debtor nation. He doesn't get to that part. Well, he brushes it. He gets to it a little bit. Few more minutes of this one.
He was often willing to cross the line in terms of legitimate advocacy. Now, what happens to Harry Dexter White? Well, he goes before the House Un-American Activities Committee in August of 1948, voluntarily to defend himself. He dies of a heart attack 2 days later. Now,
Oh man, we never got to hear his side of the story about how he helped double cross everybody. He conveniently died just like Jack Ruby died.
Case becomes very, very controversial among historians, much more controversial than that of Alger Hiss. And the reason, in my view, is that the White case is sort of like a murder mystery where you have the witnesses, you have the weapon, as it were, but you have no clear motive. What are the witnesses? We have people.
I got a motive. They're covering up a reset history.
Like Whittaker Chambers and Elizabeth Bentley, but much more than that. In the late 1990s, we find out through declassified Soviet wartime intelligence cables that the United States had intercepted and decoded, that Harry Dexter White and his activities are mentioned, I found, in 18 separate.
They found out he was a spy. It was all a spy in the 1990s, and that's when China decided to test the gold and said Fort Knox was a fake. Back it up a little bit. It's a kind of like a murder mystery. But as everybody knows, ask my kids, I'm the only person that's always I've decoded all those mystery movies. The Sixth Sense, I saw that coming a mile away and said so. I said, because they don't give you a question unless they have the answer. They're not going to make a movie and later say, oh, we just solved it. It's there for you if you can find it. You got to keep looking. You got to be your own little Sherlock Holmes, everybody.
Where you have the witnesses, you have the weapon, as it were, but you have no clear motive. What are the witnesses? We have people like
no clear motive. Oh, wait a minute. I already said that part.
But much more than that. In the late 1990s, we find out through declassified Soviet wartime intelligence cables that the United States had intercepted and decoded, that Harry Dexter White and his activities are mentioned, I found, in 18 separate cables. The FBI gave me 13,000 pages of documents on White under the Freedom of Information Act. I found 18 cables mentioning White and his activities. You have the weapon, as it were. Congressman Richard Nixon in 1950 goes.
Yeah, here we go with Nixon. Nixon, Eisenhower's vice president, loses to Kennedy, becomes the president, has his vice president resign, appoints Gerald Ford, Warren Commission member of the assassination, so-called assassination. So then Nixon resigns. Ford's now the president from the Warren Commission. He appoints a Rockefeller. It's all a vicious circle from these international monetary people, but I don't want to get sidetracked and go on all night.
Press conference and waves a handwritten memorandum written by Harry Dexter White, which Whittaker Chambers had turned over to Nixon. It was clearly written in the mid-1930s. It contains classified information. It, in fact, bangs the reader over the head, and emphasizing this, it says things like, this is unknown outside the U.S. Treasury. It contains all sorts of information, economic information. It contains information on Japanese military protection of its oil storage facilities, a remarkable range of things. But you have no clear motive. Why would the man have done this? And I think I've been able to shine some light on that. In the course of my research in his archives, I found a handwritten essay of his that apparently nobody had seen before. It was buried in a large folder of miscellaneous scribblings. It's probably written in 1944. It's about 30 pages handwritten.
I found it in a folder of miscellaneous files. It was probably forged around 1934. I don't know. But I know that Gog and Magog is upon us, so watch out for the money. A couple more minutes here.
Written on his view of what the post-war world should be. And most of the document is devoted to arguing why the U.S. must go into a permanent peacetime alliance with the Soviet Union. He blasts American hypocrisy towards the Soviet Union. He blames, quote unquote, rampant imperialism in the United States and the powerful Catholic hierarchy that's stopping this alliance. And then he extols the virtues of Soviet socialism. He ends his essay by paraphrasing the famous radical journalist Lincoln.
The temporary worker was a Jewish spy all along, everybody. That's what he's trying to say.
Against Stephens, who, after visiting Petrograd in 1919, famously said, "I have seen the future and it works." White writes, "The Soviet Union is the first instance of a socialist economy in action, and it works!" Exclamation point. This man is a true believer in the success of the great Soviet experiment with socialism. And you can find in other writings of his and testimony of other people that he believed passionately that after the war, the world is going to be moving in this direction. For example, state trading is going to come to predominate. He believes that the United
Well, as long as he believed in it passionately,
it worked for a quarter century, roughly from 1945 to 1971. But the first 9 European countries to meet the currency convertibility requirements in the IMF Articles of Agreement, that is, that the currencies be convertible into US dollars, they didn't meet these criteria until 1961. By this point, the system is already coming under enormous strain because the US is losing gold stocks. That is, we begin running balance of payments deficits. Gold is flooding out of the country. In the 1960s, we keep piling on restrictions on dollar convertibility into gold. As you all know, in 1971, after the French send a battleship to New York to pick up their gold from the New York Fed, President Nixon...
After the French send a battleship to pick up their gold, what happened?
And on August 15th, makes an historic announcement that the gold window shall be henceforth closed and the US dollar will never again be convertible into gold. So it really operated for a very short period. And that period was one of enormous strain. So I don't think it's a good touchstone for what we should want to go forward with. Now, just as a practical political matter, could we ever get the sort of agreement between the world's largest creditor nation and the world's largest debtor nation today that we got at Bretton Woods? Well, the United States is the world's largest creditor nation at Bretton Woods.
Is this the man that makes the Conspiracy RS videos? He seems to be well informed. Edna Bell is just asking questions. She just asked it. If anybody has an answer, let her know.
Britain is the world's largest debtor. Today, China is the world's largest creditor nation. The United States is the world's largest debtor. Fascinatingly, we use the same language in describing the problems of the international monetary system today as Keynes used in the 1940s. For example, in 2010, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, some of you may remember, called for caps to be put on persistent current account surpluses. Of course, this was directed at China. This is pure Keynes. This is exactly the sort of thing that the British were arguing in the 1940s, that the problems in the international monetary system were all caused by the dominant creditor. And it was the United States behavior that needed to be constrained. Of course, we rejected that view in the 1940s. Likewise, how does China characterize the problems of the international monetary system today? Well, it's all the fault of...
China says there is no problem in the international monetary system today. China's got it right going on, man. Isn't this fun? Check this out.
American financial community on the World Bank. It was the IMF that they didn't like.
And Wall Street got Eugene Meyer and Gene Black.
Exactly.
Their own as presidents of the World Bank.
That's right.
You want to hop on and say anything about gold?
So Roosevelt himself was quite not like Napoleon, but he was
Yeah.
quite rich. And
Gold standard, Fort Knox gold, anything. What you need?
He like Churchill didn't really pay terribly much attention. There were times at which he was forced to pay attention. For example, at the Atlantic Charter discussions, this is 1941, with Churchill, the State Department and the Treasury are both putting enormous pressure on the British to agree to so-called Article 7, which is basically an end to imperial preference. And Churchill pleads with Roosevelt, saying, you can't make me go before Parliament with this. I just can't do it. There'll be an open revolt. And Roosevelt actually writes personal correspondence to Churchill saying, it's the furthest thing from my mind that I would use Lend-Lease aid in order to force an end to imperial preference. The State Department in particular are furious about this. Cordell Hull is a fierce a free trader and views imperial preference as a moral abomination. But Roosevelt wants to get this deal done. Now, Roosevelt doesn't keep his word. And this causes Churchill grievous difficulties before Parliament some years later. But it's not because Roosevelt actually did want to use Lend-Lease with these ulterior motives in mind. It was his Treasury in particular, and to some degree his State Department, that decided that they could use this to get these concessions. And Congress was very, very useful to them for this. The Lend-Lease legislation that went through Congress in 1942 demanded that the U.S. get quote-unquote consideration for Lend-Lease aid. Now, Roosevelt had argued that Lend-Lease aid was itself in American national interest. So the idea of consideration was not his.
So it is possible. And remember that all of that started in 1941 for a war that was finished by 1945. And they were negotiating it the whole way. Is it that hard to extrapolate and believe it could be from a reset world position that this was all still them trying to figure out how they keep us that little bit of money, just enough to keep getting it around, make that day. They do it all for the money. And it happened to, Great Britain went down. And now we're going down. Let's just drop in on, is this happening today? Well, here's a big picture, says this is now tyranny. Looks like there's going to be some upsets in the economy, and it's all about the economy. Now, Boris Johnson, he's probably been, new party allegations, and they might not mean party. What party are you with, a labor union? He's doing cocaine, possibly, riots across Europe. It's all happening here. Weather would be enough. Sarah Palin's making an effort to get back in the news, it looks. vax over my dead body as she strives once again to keep her body in the news. It better not touch my kids. Oh yeah, we got that market too. But she's right. You know, don't do it over your dead body. Sarah Palin, run away. Take your children and hide. Masks on planes forever, according to Dr. Fauci. Jim Cramer, the noted economist, has COVID, and he's been jabbed 3 times. Oh no, the stocks are spooked. Trump is booed for getting a booster. The X-Men, he was traumatized by these guys. They're perverts, I guess. Tom Beatty, you know, something for everybody. China disappears. Top social media influencer. It must have said something bad about China because they're in charge. And Moscow plotting Christmas Eve invasion. Not a George. They're going to do a George Washington? They're going to pull a George Washington? Because we know that's what he did. Good. I'm still sharing. I know. The last one by John Levy was pretty well, you know, that was a good one about mud flood and time. I just think, you know, it's important to, we're going to find time for the Bible. We're going to find time for a lot of different ones. So that's what this one is finished. Put out on, it says Christmas 2020. It doesn't have the, you know, that other one had 666. This has 652.
August 15th, 1971 will stand as an important event in economic history for many generations. In fact, you know, hundreds of years from now, people will look back to that day.
The sun rises today as it has a million times before. Commuters wake up and travel to their offices to begin the day's work. Farmers tend to their crops. Construction workers build new infrastructure. Today is a day like any other. Or is it? In 2008, the world experienced one of the greatest financial turmoils in history. Markets around the world started crashing, and major financial institutions, once thought to be invincible, started showing signs of collapse. Governments responded quickly, issuing massive bailouts and stimulus packages in an effort to keep the world economy afloat.
Because the banks were too big to fail. If this is recent history, everybody, it's happening on your watch. It's happening on our watch.
Concerned that something terrible is waiting in the wings. We're told that the global financial crisis of a few years ago has been fixed. But what if the crisis isn't the cause of the angst so many of us feel, but rather the symptom of a much deeper problem?
Resounding music. Resounding music. Talking about Bretton Woods. There we go. Nice bus, man. New financial system for a world. And look at all of that. They had 400 or more delegates from 40 countries. I think it's 700 delegates from 40 countries during the war. already planning what are we going to run this money on? And it was all a big con by the United States. Golden age of prosperity. What?
The world's reserve currency.
The Bretton Woods system was created after the Second World War at the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. And rather than using gold as the means of exchange between countries, as was the case under the old gold standard, the dollar was going to be used. The dollar was chosen because back then it was as good as gold.
Back then, the dollar was as good as gold. What is it? Tell me, smart person.
Keys on a keyboard of a computer, and the Treasury of the United States government now has another $1 trillion that it can spend. That's where that money came from. And so that creates a liability on the part of the federal government to pay it back, plus interest. Now think about that, plus interest. Well, when it comes time to pay it back, plus the interest, they can't pay it back, and they certainly can't pay it back plus interest too. So what they do is they borrow more to cover the original loan plus the interest. And then by that time, Congress wants more money anyway. So the debt just keeps going up and up and up and up.
Under the current monetary system,
So here, I've got to take a break here for a second. But let me open a new tab. And, you know, what we got to do is just here. I just thought in my mind what this reminds
It creates a
me
liability
of.
on the part of the federal
Stop it.
government to pay it
Hey,
back,
you.
plus interest. Now think about that, plus interest.
Stop it. You're being redundant. So what we need to do to fill this out is come up with this is what happened. This is the predicament the United States are in. And yeah, I think that this is funny. So we just need to look at the lyrics. This has bigger print. So this is what happened to the United States. This is the intro to the song. See? Because they come up with the lyrics here pretty soon. I've been caught stealing once when I was 5. I enjoy stealing. It's just as simple as that. Well, it's just a simple fact. When I want something, man, I don't want to pay for it. They just don't want to pay for it. See, that's what they're saying. Get the next set of lyrics here. So he just walks right in the door and says, it's mine, mine, all mine. And that's how we get here.
Interest. Well, when it comes time to pay it back, plus the interest, they can't pay it back, and they certainly can't pay it back plus interest too. So what they do is they borrow more to cover the original loan plus the interest. And then by that time, Congress wants more money anyway. So the debt just keeps going up and up and up and up.
Under the current monetary system, we borrow all of our currency into existence, and we promise to pay it back plus interest. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar? The answer is you have to borrow that. It's a Ponzi scheme because you can never pay it off. It always requires that we go deeper into debt.
Since 1971, the United States has been running trade deficits with the rest of the world, meaning we've been buying a lot more products from the rest of the world than they have been buying from us. The Japanese and Koreans sell us cars and electronics. The Middle East sells us oil. And the Chinese sell us seemingly everything on our Walmart shelves. The U.S. pays for these products with U.S. dollars.
So anyway, they're suspicious of these U.S. dollars.
There have been dozens and dozens of currency collapses since the end of the Second World War, and they all result from the same thing, bad policies, bad management. And the U.S. right now is pursuing bad policies. Central bank is doing a bad job managing their currency.
Am I kicking a dead horse here? That's not what I wanted to do. Look, I'm closing that out. Fractal Bear have wondered, were all of our most beautiful and old buildings possibly made by Titan-sized giants? And Leonard said, more likely, they are made of the Titans. I think he's got one of these saws or a stone like it, yeah? I like to look at the pictures of the stones that Leonard takes. Yeah, some rocks had to not melt. They only melt like bricks. They get fired on one side at a time. There's still, especially in the mountains, is where you can find the real deal. I got another video suggested by my big brother, Randy. Liquid stones. And I had done a video on this because I saw somebody else do a video on it. Now they're doing a video on it. And maybe these polymer stones of like when they were building the, great exhibitions that everybody likes to talk about, the white cities, the electric cities, and they were just plaster. Well, here's the thing. They are calling this whole geopolymer what the ancients used to call liquid stone. They called it plaster, but it really was liquid stone. So we'll keep up on a little bit of that right now and just see what is this liquid stone that's sweeping the world.
French limestone is so loosely bound it doesn't require crushing. But unlike in Giza, it contains no kaolin clay. We heap the cement additives, lime, natron, and kaolin clay near the limestone. The two components will react in the water and will institute geological glue, which will then...
Also going to be looking at geopolymer marble and geopolymer concrete, just so you know the difference and you can spot all this stuff out, all this man-made stuff that we are getting told is natural and rocks and stuff like that. So 100 times stronger than concrete with cement. And that's why we've still got so many of these ancient structures all over the place, especially if you go to places like Sudan and you've got these rocks in the middle of the desert. In my eyes, they just poured a big solution and then chopped out what they wanted. That's what it looks like to me, and that's what it seems. So just look at dry cast limestone. Ornaments are handmade using crushed limestone. Slight bit of water was added, just enough to hold the composite together. Right, so I've spoke about cast before, and now this is in limestone, cast limestone. Now inside all this limestone, this is all poured limestone, by the way. Now inside this is an intricate, advanced water system, okay? And that is what cast is. We just think it's natural. Cast is a man-made material.
And it might be a man, because if you look at it and what Leonard was trying to hint at, and what I hope he's learned from me, and it's just as possible that these are tunnels through what they call bricks that are in the ground because God built it from maybe the Titans. And that's why they find all these naturally occurring tunnels that siphon water up to the mountains. Because let's face it, all the rivers don't dry up in the mountains when the snowpack is gone. That's just a proven fact. But that's beyond the scope of today's gold-centered show.
Of limestone to build hydro systems. And it's also funny that they use the word cast when they describe a large amount of limestone, because I'm sitting here saying,
Or they could have just got heated up and looked like they're cast together on the outside, but a brick's on the inside. I get that other side of the argument too, but that works for me also. I'm in the all-time win-win situation now. Thank you, Lord Jesus.
Head. So you've got straight lines. Just, to me, geopolymer poured in lines. And look at the consistency of it. You know, the army are there. They've obviously been mashing up the place. It's probably them that sprayed all this chemical over it. But look, geopolymer, it doesn't look natural whatsoever. Now, again, there is some metal holding up.
There's that infinity sign on their head. And this guy was going to hit it with a sledgehammer. He's going to knock it off that wall because, you know, they got to get rid of the ornamentation. That's what I wanted you to see about that part of it.
Are the oldest surviving rock cut caves in India. But I don't believe they're rock cut. And everyone that's saying things are rock cut, like, I admit, I can hold my hands up, I was wrong. I was saying everything in Malta was rock.
Does anybody else have a hard time understanding this guy's English accent? I mean, I've heard some English accents, but dude, give it to me one more time.
Caves, or hill caves, are the oldest surviving rock cut caves in India. But I don't believe they're rock cut. And everyone that's saying things are rock cut, like, I admit, I can hold my hands up, I was wrong. I was saying everything in Malta was rock cut, but I wasn't aware of the knowledge I know now. And I can correct myself, cut. And everyone that's saying things are rock cut, like, I admit, I can hold my hands up, I was wrong. I was saying everything in Malta was rock cut, but I wasn't aware of the knowledge I know now. And I can correct myself and hold my hands up and say, yeah, I was wrong. Right. Now, with that being said, these are not...
What being said? No, we get it, man. I'm just teasing him. I'm teasing him. Now, these are just straight up body parts. You know, these aren't cast. You know, maybe those are. But these roads, these have to be body parts. Nobody's going to cast it for that unless it was a monorail. Could be a monorail situation, but these are definitely not cart paths. Hit him with the cart path thing one more time.
Now, the next picture I'm going to show you is brilliant because this is like a road with geopolymer houses either side.
This is the geopolymer house over here. Looks like an old train, or that could be an eyeball, and maybe here's the other house over here, and it could be a body part. Nope, it's a house part.
Houses on the left, houses on the right, tracks down the middle. And like I said in a video I've done about these places actually pass points of interest. So they'll go past amphitheaters and they'll go past places that are big.
Aha, that's a ticket booth. What's this?
And then that's even unexplainable itself. People believe that.
You know what? This is the gift that keeps giving, this statue. I remember doing videos on it in 2016.
For example, this 18th century sculpture includes an intricate net carved from a single block of marble. Was created by some geezer without assistance. See, what they're doing is really, they're putting these guys' names to them and giving them credit. When really, this guy didn't even probably make it. This is probably ancient or a heck of a lot older, done by obviously geopolymer by some guy who works for the government on the sly. Let's examine these intricate...
Remember those guys in the Bretton Woods agreements? They were working for the government on the sly. This is kicking the world over. Geopolymers, it's new. It's happening. It's something you have to consider. Maybe not that much of it.
Rounded edges, and it's dry.
Now you see the difference between making a temple. Now I'll just give you a hint. Is there a difference between what God prefers a temple of unhewn stone or something you bought from a King Hiram out of a kit? Of course. And what we're looking at now is a temple of unhewn stone. There we go.
And it's full of flint. Which just goes to prove it was a geopolymer solution or mix, and they've added the flint after. Megalithic. No one talks about this stuff. There's also a geezer called Gary something who wrote a book about this island, and he spent 30 years over there, and I was so disappointed when I showed him the pyramid that we discovered. And he told me it was a shooting range, and that's how I thought, right, you're a gatekeeper, mate. You spent 30 years over there and you ain't come out with nothing. Anyway, I've done 2 days over there and I've come out with all sorts of stuff. Check this building out quickly. On top of a melted, as in this was a geopolymer structure, and it's had something thrown over it like some sort of chemical to make it look like it's melted. Maybe through rain, acid rain or something, who knows? Let's have a Brucey. Let's have a Brucey. I want to big up a couple of channels here because I think they deserve it. So you've got a couple of females or women over on Tartarian Truthers over in Australia. These have popped out to me out of nowhere and they are absolutely killing it. Girls, wicked content. I love it. Please go over, guys, and give these girls, some support.
Now he doesn't mean it's wicked. That's not what he's trying to say. He means a different one. But look at my friend Wise Up's getting a shout out.
So, Wise Up, I hope it's not one of your cronies or you on a fake profile, mate, because I have so much respect for you. Right, melted bricks. Let's have a look. These bits that I've highlighted are melted. Other bits are not. So the melted bits are what we're looking at, and it's very droopy, okay? Bits that have had more heat, it's droopy, all right? And this is a clay brick, that's why it's drooping. If it was a more consistency of sand, it would vitrify it. Now, let's have a look at this building. To me, it doesn't look melted, it looks 3D printed. I'm not saying it's 3D printed, I'm saying it looks 3D printed.
There's always going to be room for you waiting at the end of the, whatever you look at, whatever rabbit trail you'll come back to, there's going to be melted hills from the Bible. Another show on tunnels. I'm doing a video right now. So is Fander Films.
Well, hello everyone. This is Al-Fadi, and you're in for a special treat. If you are watching us right now through our YouTube channel, Sierra International, or even the Fander Films YouTube channel for Dr. J. Smith, or if you are on my Facebook page, alfadi.sierra, you are going to be definitely enjoying the content and the guests that will be joining us shortly here. The topic, obviously, as you have noticed, is called the historical critique of Islam, and specifically introducing the sin sifters. This is a nickname that Dr. J came up with just maybe a day or so ago. And what we mean by...
I know this is a surprise, but give it a chance. In their world, the sin sifters, sin stands for the standard Islamic narrative, which these people are trying to expose as being fake.
Sin is the standard Islamic narrative. And the guests that we have are the one who have been unpacking many of the holes in that particular narrative. That's why we're calling them the sifters. They're going through what is real, what is not real, what is factual, what is not factual. And I really came up with this idea and shared it with Dr. J And I'm so glad that he enjoyed and liked this idea. And then we shared it with our guests, whom we will be introducing soon here, to see if they'll be willing to take some of their busy time to join us, especially at this time of year. And we are so honored to have a large caliber, high caliber of scholarship that will be joining us soon. We have a number of people whom Dr. J. Smith probably have introduced in the past on his channel, have even introduced in different formats concerning their research when it comes to the holes in the standard Islamic narrative. I myself have the privilege, of course, of introducing Brother Mill, who will be one of those guests, but we have others such as Brother Murad. We have also Odin. We have Paul and Paul Ellis, if you wish. And also we have Thomas. But I'm just giving you a flavor of those guests that will be joining us. And each one of them have a passion about a specific topic related to the standard Islamic narrative, but also they've covered many other areas, obviously. However, we are going to let them unpack things for us from that perspective. Now, a couple of special things about this particular live stream. It will be a 2-hour live stream, so make sure if you're planning on staying the whole time to plan for 2 hours.
We can't stay here the whole time, but I do want to say I'm very excited about fulfilling this dream I've always had of streaming a live stream on good information.
If not, obviously, we can always some of your questions as time permits, and we'll do our best to address your concerns and your comments as well. But let me start first by introducing our dear brother, Dr. J. Dr. J, thank you so much, of course, for doing what you do, brother. It's really amazing.
You remember this guy?
Type of.
You remember this guy? He's been doing this a long time. He knows everything about Islam is a hoax. That's something I didn't figure out till just a little while ago. So I've been leaning on them for more of the proofs, because all I ever had was like a couple of pictures of Muhammad that I'd put up and go, ha ha, look, there's Muhammad, ha ha, it's fake. But now I got all of these like, yeah, it's super fake.
Comments that I get all the time about the work that you've been doing. I'm blessed to have this partnership with you. It seemed like we have this rapport together, and people enjoy really this dialogue. I bring my background. I'm a former Muslim, speak Arabic. I'm from Saudi Arabia, which is the focus of your research, has to do with Mecca, which is in Saudi, and also the Quran and the man, which is Muhammad. All are associated and affiliated according to the Islamic narrative, obviously the standard Islamic narrative, with that region. This is why I enjoy to have this back and forth with you, and also to confirm some of the facts that you are presenting, because people, I know how my Muslim people think. They may accuse you of like, you don't know what you're talking about, you've never been there. Well, you have someone who's been there, so we can complement one another. But what got you yourself into this particular field?
Well, it happened way back in the 1990s. I was in London. I was living in London. I was there for 25 years. I would go down to a place called Speaker's Corner. And I was...
You know, one good thing that is so cool is that while I wait for this to buffer, so I, you know, as much as I like Dr. J, we need to keep going a little bit with some of these tabs. So I just wanted to let you know, look, you could be editing counterintuitive right now. You know, doing these things, but you have to log in and do it. You know, not that you want to do anything with, you know, the word counterintuitive, but I was just encouraging you to do it because I was looking up counterintuitive and I found a lot of things on Wikipedia in it. Counterintuitive, because so much of their history I find counterintuitive, that they want us to believe things that are counterintuitive. They have all of these things. I picked out only a few. Pathological mathematics is counterintuitive. The Weierstrass function is continuous everywhere, but differential nowhere. What? It has no differential function? It just goes down to a point? It does a dead cat bounce? I don't know what it means, but I was looking for things that are counterintuitive. You get the horn-shaped sphere from Jordan Schoenflieg's theorem. It's also counterintuitive. Most math is well behaved. Mathematicians like their math well behaved, but some people don't. They have even found a pure and applied mathematics and call them something separate than just numbers. Algorithm influence, okay. You had me and you lost me. This is counterintuitive. Minimal counterintuitiveness effect. Not the same Pascal This guy's a French revolutionary, argued that minimally counterintuitive concepts that violate the few ontological, they have to always bring God into the situation, don't they? It's like they can't even talk about minimal counterintuitiveness effects without wanting to talk
Ontological.
Ontology, sometimes referred to as the science of being, and belongs to the major branch of philosophy known as metaphysics. Ontologists often try to determine what the category of the highest kinds are. It's the study of God. It's this basic study of God, and if there is a God, what type of God should there be? That's the philosophy. And if there is a God, do we owe him anything? They brought that in rather quickly, in my opinion, for minimal counterintuitiveness effect. Very short page. Nothing precise going on here, but counterintuitive it must be. So this actually had nothing, man. I couldn't get anything from this counterintuitive, most vexing parse of why it would have its own page, only because it's probably being used. I've studied a little C++ computer stuff, and they must be using it for artificial intelligence because they have one most vexing parse of some of the crazy prefixes and suffixes, and this is how they're learning how to get past them as of in 2001. So nope, I don't do the code. I know people that do code. My wife did code, but somehow I ran upon something I looked up as what is the purpose of the most vexing code. Probably this one, because I think certificates are the way to go instead of degrees from colleges right now. Go learn something like, JP Williams software or SAP software with a few good, like up-to-date green belt certificates. And you'll always do that working if you want to work for the man, you fucking puppet. They're parsing it somewhere. I looked that up.
Parse.
A false parse was retired. It's an act of the result obtained by parsing a string or text. A failed phrase was retired. Like if you're looking for artificial intelligence, that's how you use it in a noun. But normally we go like, I'm parsing out a sentence, parse, analyze the sentence into its parts and describe their syntactic roles. So we're back to Acts 7:16 with that's the lesson on money. But sorry about cussing. Let's keep doing that streaming thing.
Taking a course at School of Orient and African Studies from Dr. Gerald Hawting. And the course was on the historical perspective, looking at history, the historical critique of Islam, the emergence of Islam. And it was an entire year course of just looking at how Islam actually emerged from the historical standpoint. What does history actually tell us? And I remember as I started taking this course, there were about 40 or 50 students in the class. Within 2 weeks, good 20 of them had left, and they were all Muslims. And some of them, as they left, they were slamming the door and yelling explicatives, which I'm not permitted to repeat right now, about what he was saying, because what he was doing, he was just asking what was really happening in the 7th century from what history can tell us. So this was back in 1993, 1994. I started seeing the reaction of the Muslims, so I started taking it down to Speaker's Corner and started introducing it as Speaker's Corner. And it was the reaction of the Muslims when they heard this kind of material, because they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to respond to it. Oh, I got punched. I got my glasses broken.
He started introducing the material at Speaker's Corner around 1994. Saying you Muslims are fake. That's the real zeitgeist that needs to be done.
It was obvious to me that this historical critique, at that time I said, this has got to be the Achilles heel of Islam. If they can't respond, if this is the only response they can give by yelling and explicatives and slamming the door, leaving the class, and at the same time at Speaker's Corner, if all they can do is punch me, we have got something here. And I started to think, and I said, hold on a minute, if this was done to me with Christianity, would we not have the same problems? And I remember in my days as a seminary student where we studied the historical critique. We looked at redacted criticism, we looked at textual criticism of the Bible, we looked at source criticism of all these stories. I remember going through this during my master's thesis, and we realized, hold on a minute, we have already had this. This has been done to us, and Christianity has pretty much been able to, not only has been able to answer every one of these criticisms, but has been fomented because of these criticisms. So why can't we take the same questions, the very same questions that were asked of Jesus, whether or not he existed, whether or not he died on the cross, ask the same questions of the Bible, whether or not we can go back to the manuscripts, looking at the textual criticism that is done of the Bible, ask those questions that have already been done on our Lord and our Savior and on our scriptures, and let's take it to Islam, on their man, their book, and now more recently, their place. The book would be the Quran, the man would be Muhammad, and the place, of course, would be Mecca. So that's what I started doing. That was 1994. 1995, I did my first debate on this, and this was with Dr. Jamal Badawi at Cambridge University, Trinity College. I did a 2-hour debate, and all I did was ask 10 historical questions, all of which I got from Dr. Patricia Corona the week before. Dr. Patricia Corona, as you well know, is probably one of the leading scholars she's no longer living in this area. She was head of department there at Cambridge University, and she was the one that put that debate together for me. 10 historical challenges, none of which have been resolved, have been answered by Muslims. And that was in 1995 that I did that debate. So here we are at the end of 2021, and we're still asking the same question. But then what happened was about a year and a half ago, we remember that interview between Dr. Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab, where they asked the question about the Qiraat in the Ahruf. And he put out his hand and says, which are you going to put there? And Yasser Qadi says, we don't. A guy named Murad from the Middle East, and Murad came on board, and I said, these guys are brilliant. These guys are brilliant. But then I came across another name there, a guy named Thomas. And I said, who's this Thomas guy? Here I find out he's from Germany. But I was just looking at the comments below the videos on Fender Films. And the comments are brilliant. And I hope you look at your comments, because when you look at the comments, you start to see who are the people who really know what they're talking about, who are the people who have really done their homework, who are the people who are actually coming up with reference after reference. And I contacted them. And I said, can you come on board? Can you say, I don't want to be the one to hear it. I want the whole world to hear it. Why don't you come on board and let's have you unpack this material? So that's why we brought them today. I want these 5 guys for you to see, for you, your audience, because your audience really hasn't, except for Mel, you really don't know these guys yet. You haven't come across them yet. And I want you to introduce to your group, because your group is even larger than what I have. I want your subscribers to start to get to a whole new panoply of major players. These are the major players. And so these guys, as you're going to find, have not just been doing this for a few weeks. They've been doing this for years. And the material that they have come up with, you and I can communicate it, and that's our job. We're sitting there to communicate it, to make sure it gets out to the world. But the men who are actually doing the research, the hard research, are the ones we're going to introduce now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this excellent segue.
Well, before we go on, we are calling ourselves the Sin Sifters. What is a sifter? This is a sifter, folks. Let me just show it to you. Listen, I was getting back all this. What did you mean? What does sifter mean? And it's all from guys. If you were women, you know exactly what I'm talking, because every one of you women have one of these in your kitchen. This is where you sift through. What do? You put things through you, and what comes out is the good stuff. You want to get the bad stuff that stays in there, and you throw the bad stuff away. What we're doing is, and every one of these guys that we're going to introduce this afternoon, they have been putting the standard Islamic narrative into this. And what's coming out of it is what is actually historical. So we're sifting the SIN, the standard Islamic narrative. We're sifting sin. So you can see it's a play on words for obvious and people who get it. We're sifting the sin, the standard Islamic narrative, and we're trying to find out what is historical. That's why we're calling ourselves the Sin Sifters. We are the ones that really are trying to get back, not to the 8th, the 9th century, or 10th century. We want to go back to the 7th century. We want
this simple narrative that cannot be corroborated with a number of evidence that has been unpacked so far, and possibly even more in the future. Now, if you are listening to us on our podcast, this is also a special live stream of our Let Us Reason. It's going to be actually 4 parts for our radio audience. This is part 1, and we will introduce shortly the first guest, Brother Mel. But before I do so, I just want to remind our also amazing control room. At some point, I would like to start seeing the comments in front of me, so to see if anyone is asking any specific questions, because we are dealing with live audience as well. So we'll start with Brother Mel. Brother Mel, thank you so much, of course, for taking time to be here with us. You and I actually have interacted numerous times, and just up until recently, we actually did, if I recall, 9 or 10 video series. We even called it Holes in the Narrative. And you brilliantly came up with a number of evidences that can show why at every single level, in every episode, there is a hole that cannot be really basically vouched for if we rely only on the historical data provided to us by the narrative itself. Rather, your findings pointed out to an obvious contradiction. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself one more time, Mel, to our audience, to the level you feel comfortable with, and tell us about your passion. I mean, you deal a lot with maps, iconography, tomes, things like that. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm Mel, and I'm from Ireland. I got involved with Jay back in 2015 at Speaker's Corner. I was one of the quiet ones in his group, observing, taking notes, and I was really fascinated with a video that he did on the internet to do with the historical critique of Islam. And around that time, Dan Gibson's theory was really big, and it just grabbed me. It was like a big puzzle I wanted to solve. And like a lot of people, I looked at the Hadiths, and I spent about 3 months reading through al-Bukhari's Hadiths and realized pretty quickly that this is just fantasy stuff. So I went from there to look at, well, is there anything historical in that story? And so I decided to look at the earliest sources I could find about Muhammad. So I was kind of focused mostly about Muhammad for the first couple of years. And the big one that really stood out was the 2 earliest sources placed someone called Muhammad, in inverted commas, or anonymous prophet, in Palestine in 634. And I went, hey, that doesn't quite fit the standard Islamic narrative. So we have him in the wrong place and at the wrong time. He's meant to be dead 2 years, and yet the two earliest sources we have him still alive. And it seems to coincide, incidentally, with the time that Umar was meant to be the leader at that time. So that was a big, interesting sort of area. And since then, I've been a bit of a jack of all trades. I've been looking at different things, been looking at maps, I've been looking at archaeology.
So he's one of these guys connected with Vander Films. And I'm going to just, assume that these guys are not going to care if I share their material. Go to it. I want you to support them and views and, your own discernment, but anything to help us to realize that why we know now why they faked and they needed a Muslim religion. I hope they get into real soon how they were, it was a Christian hymnal. The whole Quran is a joke. So I hope you stick with it. Pause it, do what you got to do, and come back.
Thing is up north, and this is a common theme. Every time you delve into this, you keep seeing that it must have happened up in the north and not down south. For example, if you ask, where were the Christian communities that Muhammad was supposed to have interacted with up in the Fertile Crescent? Where were the Jewish communities up in the Fertile Crescent? Where are the stations of Abraham that the Quran refers to? It's again up in the Fertile Crescent. Where were the populations? Every question you ask, where was the conflicts between the Byzantines and the Persians? Way up north. And then when you compare that with the Hijaz, what you find an area that has no people, by and large. It has no water, has no vegetation, it has no history, has no culture. And then you try and match that up with the Hittites, and you have to conclude that something was made up along the way. And the more I went into it over the last few years, the more I discovered that there was less and less true about it. So that's where I'm at. That's sort of a quick summary of where I've come.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's, of course, fascinating. And of course, we're going to visit with you. Obviously, we still have at least an hour and a half left, a little over. And I'm trying to see some of the comments, by the way, folks. So forgive me. It's still hard for me to see all of it. But we will get back to the comments probably starting in the next part. Now I'm going to move on to Brother Murad. Brother Murad, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit also more about yourself, to the extent that you feel comfortable, of course, to do so. And I know you've done some amazing work concerning the name Muhammad, especially in the Quran. So if you can shed some light on that.
Well, thank you for having me. I am Murad. I am an amateur Arab researcher who has been looking into the history of Islam for more than 10 years. So basically, I am a little bit like Al-Fadi, but the only difference is his English is much better than mine. I am a Muslim, then I became an atheist, but now I consider myself a theist. So I believe in God, but in a very primitive manner. Robert Spencer's debate with David Wood, did Muhammad exist, is what actually inspired me to look into the historical critique of Islam. Most people know me from Mel's channel, Sneakers Corner. So if you think like Batman and Robin, Mel would be Batman, I would be Robin. I have been his sidekick for like 2 years. But the most exposure was the video that we did, me and Mel, with Dr. J. Smith on the Dome of the Rock. It surpassed 100,000 views. And my new YouTube channel will focus in 2022, this year, about the Aramaic roots of the Quran, the meaning of the Quran, the real meaning of it. And I will depend on the work of Christoph Luxemburg and also Gabriel.
Both in the Dome of the Rock and also in the Quran.
Well, you see the name Muhammad, if you look at it, how it was written in Aramaic, the name Yeshua. The name Yeshua is written, it looks almost identical to the name Muhammad. So it's very possible that when they Arabized the Quran at a later stage that they read this name in this way. So Al-Muhammad means Al-Mumajjad, and this is what we say in Arabic. So, and everything in the Dome of the Rock, it's actually an attack on Christianity. And if I was going to construct the Dome of the Rock, the first thing I would like to put inside is the verses relating to the night journey, not attacking Christianity. So we will find that this also hits the night journey, and it was an attack, I think, on Byzantine Christianity. Basically, Abdul Malik was like flexing his power, and also Abdul Malik, he tried to make counterfeit coins against the Byzantine emperor. So there was this fight. This is not
back to the counterfeit coins. Let's skip ahead to the live part.
All of our broadcasts, I say it on Fandor Films with all of my friends here, we're always going back to the 7th century. We want to know what really happened historically. We want to know what really happened on the ground. We want to know where it was going on, who it was with, and what is it that they were doing. And we're not interested in the 8th and 9th century. We're sifting all that out and taking in what's left behind is the actual historical truth. So we are the sin sifters. We are the SIN sifters.
Thank you. Thank you. And before last part, we had the privilege of introducing three of our guests, Dr. J, Brother Mel, and Brother Murad. We are going to introduce also three more, Odin, Paul, and Thomas. But obviously, before I do that, I want to remind people that this is a 2-hour long live stream. So we're not going to cover a whole lot yet in part 2, but part 3 and part 4, when we're going to unpack even at a deeper level, more of the work that is being done, or maybe even some of the work that will be done in 2022. And just a side comment, just to my amazing team at the control room, I am still unable to see my side. If we can raise somehow the TV or see the timer as well, because I am not able really to see all of that as of yet. So it's just a matter of logistic location of these things, but thank you so much for doing that. So Odin, welcome, and this is really a privilege and an honor for me to meet you. I've heard a lot about you, and I am excited that also our viewers now to get to see who you are. So why don't you do the same thing, just give us a little bit about your background, and at the same time just tell us about the passion that you have when it comes to the this standard Islamic narrative.
Thank you for those comments, Lee. I think you're going to be very surprised when you see how much and how much proof they have that this was a Christian hymnal of some sort, or a hymnal / Psalms book, something like that, is overwhelming. So Leah, thank you for those comments in the chat room.
Well, hello Al-Fadi, hello everyone, hello Jay. Thank you for having me. So, as for me, I'm talking from France. I live in Paris. I came across Islam something like 15 years ago through a Muslim colleague who talked to me about his faith, and he talked to me also about what we call the standard Islamic narrative. At the time, I was working as a strategy consultant in a small firm in France, a bit like McKinsey, if you know. And I was very curious, and I had a very scientific mind, and I wanted to understand, because what my friend, what my colleague told me did not fit what I knew about the Bible, did not fit what I read in the Quran that I bought at the time. And so I think there was something odd in this standard Islamic narrative, that it did not fit the description of my friend of a religion completing Christianity, completing Judaism, because what we read in the Quran does not fit this at all. In the Quran, we find something else. It's not a completion. It's not something that comes after Christianity to better it, but it's a sort of setback. You go back to a sort of Judaism. This is what I first understood when I read the Quran. And then I thought to myself, there must be something. I have to look into the origins of Islam, and I have to look at it in a scientific way. and I took interest in all the researches, and I discovered that the scholars made huge breakthrough in the field of the origins of Islam. Jay was speaking of Gerald Houghton, of Patricia Crone, but in France there are many other scholars, and I've met one, Dr. Edouard Marie Galès, who actually is from Belgium. He's not French, he's Belgian. And he published a thesis in 2005, a huge thesis, 1,200 pages, about the origins of Islam, which is named Le Messie et son prophète, the Messiah and his prophet. And for the first time, I had a sort of some synthesis of all the discoveries the scholar had made before 2005. I met him, I befriended him, I worked with him, he taught me everything he knew, and I wrote with him a little book about his thesis, which is called The Great Secret of Islam, Le Grand Secret de l'Islam, which is a small book for the general public, because the general public cannot access a thesis which is 1,200 pages. And this book had a lot of success here in France. Thousands of copies were sold, and 100,000 electronic copies were downloaded. And this put me in a situation where I had to continue to keep on studying and to keep on with with science, because I wrote the book in 2014, and thereafter the discoveries kept on happening. And for example, I befriended the director of the Inara Institute. I attended many conferences there. I kept on reading, meeting scholars, and I did a sort of big update of my book, my French book, Le Grand Secret de l'Islam, The Great Secret of Islam, which will be soon available in English. And what I intend to do is to present to the general public a sort of synthesis, the big picture, in fact, the big picture of what happened in the 7th, the 8th, and 9th centuries when Islam emerged. And we can do this now. We can draw this big picture because we have new material, new studies. And especially we have, for example, coins that show us that the first Arab leaders were not Muslims, but kind of Christians or kind of Zoroastrians in the East, that they did not bear the Caliph title, for example, until Abdul Malik. He was the first one to bear the Caliph title. So what about the 4 Rashidun Caliphs? But mainly and mostly, the main discoveries have been made thanks to Quranic studies, and especially to the Quranic studies that Edouard Marie Galès featured in his thesis. He worked with Eastern Christian scholars who know Aramaic and Arabic. And thanks to this, a new reading of the Quran has been made possible. You see, most people, and especially Muslims, read the Quran according to the standard Islamic narrative. When they read Rasul, they think, oh, it must be Muhammad. When they read Bayt, they think it must be the Kaaba. When they read Nazarene, they think it must be the Christians. But is it really? And what Edouard Marie Galès and his scholars did is applying to the Quran the exegesis method he learned as a priest. Because as a priest, he became very knowledgeable in exegesis, which is very simple. It's basic common sense. It is about reading a text for what it is, what it says literally. And when you do this with the Quran, you start to unveil another story. In the Quran, you find that there is a Jewish community, a Nazarene Jewish community that was very, very influenced with its Arab audience. You find that there was an alliance between this Jewish Nazarene community and the Arab audience, an alliance which had the purpose to conquer Jerusalem, rebuild its temple, to trigger the apocalypse, to have Jesus come back as its second coming, as the Messiah, and to establish God's kingdom on earth. That did not happen. So the Arab leaders took it upon themselves to do Jesus' job, because he did not come back. And so they fought among themselves over the issue of the divine legitimacy of that power. And then emerged
Isn't that the problem that always comes back when people think that he hasn't come back yet? It all clears up when you realize this happened. You know, the argument about the Trinity, which is basically what the Muslims have against the Jews today in the world, was that they were arguing for that there was one God still. So them believing and saying like they just did that it's because he didn't come back. Well, yes, he did. The rest of this is great information, right?
The strongest, who was Abdul Malik, who beat all of his rivals and who established...
This Abdul Malik could have been, the one when all of Asia turned against Paul, the one that led him against it.
First caliphate. What is the caliphate? The caliphate is ruled by a caliph, and Abdul Malik bore the title Khalifat Allah, God's caliph, which means God's lieutenant on earth, God's vicar. So the caliphate is kind of God's kingdom. It is the territory where God's justice is enforced. And from there...
What he was saying was vicar, God's vicar, like what the Pope calls himself, the vicar of Christ. So there we could be tying in, this is when they started the corrupt version of popes being vicars instead of what it really means, a bishop, which is why they considered Peter a bishop of Rome.
Islam started to deploy, to emerge. But it is not until the Abbasid revolution, when the Abbasid coalition took power and overthrew the Umayyads, that we really saw Islam happening as a new religion, because it is the Abbasids who invented the very idea of a divine revelation in order to justify their divine power. They could not justify their power as Abdul Malik did, because they just beat his successor. And so they invented this idea of a divine revelation. So they needed a prophet. Then they invented the prophecy of Muhammad. And they needed this revelation to be something. So they invented the Quran as the sacred word of God. And they invented the story of the revelation, the Asbab al-Nuzul. They invented Mecca and so on. And so we now have a sort of very big picture, a grand scheme of things to explain how Islam emerged and to explain what is the Quran, what is Mecca, what is the prophet, did Muhammad exist, was he a real prophet, an actual prophet, and so on. But I want to insist on the very novelty of the Quranic studies that Edouard Marie-Gallès introduced, thanks to his Eastern Christian friends.
As you can see,
it is really amazing. You find that the Quran itself can be used as an historical material and can give us proof, evidence, hard evidence of events of the real story, of the actual story, which is what I called the great secret of Islam.
Right. And Odin, I think we want you to hold off to sharing more in a little bit, because this is fascinating, of course, background that you're giving people about your focus on the big picture here, which is very important because really it goes into the heart of the origin of Islam, or at least the official origin of the religion as we know it today, and the mention of the Caliph Abdul Malik, obviously. So we'll circle back to you shortly here. Hopefully, if not this part, it will be the next part. Now I want to move on to Paul. And Jay, why don't you go ahead and introduce Paul to us real quickly and let him also take it from there.
So I like Paul to introduce himself. I really got to know Paul just a few months ago. And what I've enjoyed about Paul, he is coming from a whole different standpoint, looking at what we call the Jerusalem thesis. This is his really, I think he actually coined it as well. Now, I understand that Paul is not feeling so well today. So over to you, Paul. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Feel free if you do have to cough or you have to take a drink of water. We understand. Thank you for even coming on board for us, because it's great to have you. It's good to hear your side of things.
No, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Al-Fadi, for having me. Yes, my background is that I was born in Yorkshire, in Bradford, which is on its way to becoming a great Islamic city of the West. I've been living in London since 1984, and so I really regard myself as a Londoner now, primarily. I was a lawyer for 20 years, working in a criminal court in London, and then I left that and I became a teacher for a while. In 2018, there was a conference in England, in London, and there were some really great names in Islamic research there. I'm ashamed to say I didn't really appreciate quite how illustrious these people were at the time, but I just bought a ticket because I was interested and I had a bit of time on my hands. And there were it was Nikolai Sinai was there, and Gabriel Said Reynolds and Sean Anthony, and I sat a couple of seats down from Stephen Shoemaker, and I didn't really know who any of these people were, but I absolutely fell in love with the topic of the Quran and the great mystery of what it means. And it was quite clear from the first couple of hours that Islam is completely different. The Quran is completely different to what Muslims think it is. It's absolutely beyond doubt, but there's no consensus within the academic community as to what the Quran actually is or what it means. So you've got this hugely important book, a book that's something like a fifth to a quarter of the world's population assert is the words of God, a book that governs such a huge swathe of the Earth's territory, from the North Atlantic right the way down.
And it's all based on a Christian hymnal. It's all made up out of whole cloth.
To the South Pacific. And yet, what people believe about it simply isn't true, just on a simple, factual level. So I was enthralled by this. And I so happened, I'm not a wealthy man, but I had a little bit of money that came my way. And I decided to give myself a sabbatical year and just spend the year reading and books and articles by these people and trying to figure out myself what I thought about it all. See if there was anything that I could contribute to this debate, which seemed to me vitally important and wide open. As Jay says, I've become most associated with what I call the Jerusalem thesis, which I first shared on Mel's channel about 18 months ago. And this is, in a nutshell, that when the Quran refers to a place as the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred place of prostration, and refers to it by various other names, the station of Abraham, or the Kaaba, or God's house, the holy house. These are all references to the Jerusalem temple. And the more one looks at it, one simply cannot move for evidence that this is the case. Is there so much evidence that one can't really summarize it? There's just so much of it. For example, one has the correspondences within the Quran to say that everything the Quran says about the Masjid al-Haram seems to be something that relates to the Jerusalem temple. They say that it was built by Abraham. As the Quran says it was built by Abraham, and in the Bible, the temple is built on the site where Abraham built an altar to sacrifice Isaac. It says it's the first house at Bakar. Well, Bakar is a pilgrimage destination on the way to, or stopping point on the way to the pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple. It's frequently referred to as God's house. But then the Quran devotes so much of its text to dealing with biblical characters and biblical stories. Well, where would these biblical characters, where would they regard as God's house? There's nothing in the Quran that ever indicates that that God had two houses, or that God moves his house, or that indeed that there's any kind of geographical divide between the stories that it tells that are based in the Bible and the stories that it tells that are based about the Quran's own community. There's no sense, nobody ever goes on this 900-mile or whatever journey from the Hijaz to Canaan or back again. The Quran refers to the Masjid al-Haram as the cube, and the Holy of Holies of the Jerusalem temple was a cube. And perhaps, I think most compelling of all, is the role of Jerusalem within the eschatological landscape. It is believed, or it was believed by Christians, that the major events of the apocalypse will take place in and around Jerusalem. The Messiah will descend on Mount Olives. He will then create this plain in Zechariah chapter 14. He will then come into the Jerusalem temple, and from there he will gather the nations of the world for judgment outside the gates of Jerusalem. And he will then cast the wicked into the fires of Gehenna. And this is exactly what we find in the Quran. The Quran talks about God creating this great plain of judgment. The Quran talks about seeing God's shin. The Quran talks about the wicked being thrown into the fires of what it calls Jahannam. And the Quran talks about going between Safa and Marwa. And Marwa is just an Arabized variant on Mount Moriah, which is where the temple was built. And Safa is an old name for Mount Scopus, which is just across the Kidron Valley. So all of these correspondences point towards the Jerusalem temple being the place that the Quran is constantly talking about, verse after verse, surah after surah.
Right. So, Paul, why don't you hold off to also your thoughts on this, because we're approaching the end of part 2, and I really would like for you to come back again and unpack this part for us, even at a deeper level, if you don't mind. And Thomas, if you don't mind waiting until part 3, because I want you to actually introduce yourself, and then we'll start with you by unpacking your thesis or findings concerning your passion when it comes to the Aramaic sources of the Quran. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all of you who have.
No, I'm wondering, can he read his comments yet? Is they got it figured out in the booth?
Shared so far, and next part we will have Thomas as well, who is the last guest here in this amazing panel that we have, and many people are complimenting that, and we're so thankful for that, of course. And if you have been joining us, we were actually doing this live stream on what we call the historical critique of Islam, introducing the sin, whether on Fander Films. we are presenting facts, and we're going to ask each one of them shortly to introduce also their own platforms where you can connect with them. You can benefit from some of the research and publications, whether in digital publications or maybe in a written form. But all that to say is that we are doing this for the benefit of everyone, including our Muslim friends that I am hoping that are watching us right now, and just go and examine the evidence. That's all I ask for. Just go and examine the evidence, and that's all we ask about. Well, we're left with one last panelist, and we are going to start this particular live stream and this particular part of the podcast with him, Thomas. Thomas, thank you so much, of course, for taking the time to be with us. And I would like for you really to tell people a little bit about yourself, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, obviously. And tell us also if you have your own platform, your own YouTube channel, and dive into the topic, the area of expertise that you focus on when it comes to the standard Islamic narrative. My understanding it has to do with Aramaic, of course.
Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Thomas Alexander. I'm from Germany. And my background is actually in computer science, which means that both by nature and by training, I would say I'm quite good at recognizing patterns and understanding systems, which turns out to be quite helpful when studying the history of Islam. So how did I even get into this? So I've always been a big, history nerd, if you will. So I've always been interested in history, and particularly the history of religions. And initially, actually, Islam wasn't high on my list. But that kind of changed when Christoph Luxemburg published his book on the Syro-Aramaic origins of the Quran in the year 2000. Although at that point, I wasn't all in. So I was aware of his work. I knew what he was talking about, that the Quran has has Aramaic origins. It started out as a lectionary read in Christian churches, but in non-Trinitarian Christian churches. But at that point, I still didn't think that
it was a Christian lectionary read in non-Trinitarian Christian churches, and they've turned it into terrorism are us. This is gold, people.
Much deeper. But that then changed roughly 15 years ago, I would say, when I randomly came across a radio program where Karl-Heinz Ohlig, who at that point in time was the head of the Inara Institute, was a guest, and he talked about their research and their findings, and I was absolutely fascinated because it actually went a lot deeper than what I thought from just hearing about Christoph Luxemburg. And I actually started to dig in, to read their papers that they publish and to see what this is all about. Maybe one quick word on this Inara Institute. So these are a group of scholars, which is, they're located in Saarbrücken in Germany, but it's not just German. So it's really an international effort. And they are sort of building on the old historical critical thinkers, like starting from the 19th century with Nördeke and then Ignaz Goltz here. They've already sort of laid the foundation. Alphonse Mingana as well. He, I think, was the first to actually propose this, that there's a lot of Aramaic in the Quran in the 1920s. But then this field sort of died down a bit, and it was these Inara guys in the 1990s who picked this up again and brought it really to a bigger stage once again. And that's pretty much what I've been doing over the last 15 years. I've just studied, mainly for my own benefit, so I didn't share much of it until Jay brought me onto his channel and asked me to share my findings, which I happily did. And now I'm currently, since now I've already collected everything for this YouTube format, I've now started to actually put together in book form, which I hope to finish at some point next year. It is a massive undertaking, but I hope it will all turn out well. I'm also trying to start my own YouTube channel. It's also on my list the next year. Before I can bring it online, I want to pre-produce some things. So again, it's in the future. And yeah, I guess my main point of entry was this Aramaic origin of the Quran, because what we find out when we actually look at the Quran itself is that large parts of it just don't make a lot of sense, right? So they can't really be understood. When you read the tafsir, it'll say something along the lines of, yeah, the scholars can't agree, or God knows best. So basically, even the scholars don't know what's going on there. And with people like Christoph Luxemburg, we actually now have the tools to unlock these passages that previously were incomprehensible, right? And that's really what fascinates me so much, because it really opens a whole new door for understanding the Quran. And
it opens a whole new door to understanding. That's what I keep telling people.
Yeah, I would say that's what drives me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask each one of you, I'm going to go back again to the beginning of the panel. I'm going to ask each one of you to tell us, of course, what are you doing or what are you planning on doing on 2022? I mean, Thomas already covered that for us. And then I want you to start thinking about another question I'm going to ask. What is the most damaging thing that you've discovered when it comes to the standard Islamic narrative? So let's start with Mel again. Mel, what are you working on for 2022?
Good question. I'm looking at the Greek influences on the Quran. And the reason being is I had a guest on my channel a few weeks ago who was an Alawite, and he actually said something really interesting. He says that the Alawites view the Greek philosophers as prophets. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I wonder, is there any connection there with the Quran? And
the Trinitarians worship Aristotle and Plato and those guys. So they're slipping my mind right now. Ptolemy.
what I've discovered looking into the Quran is there are definite influences there, definite points where they seem to be interested in Greek philosophers, not in a systematic way, but just a kind of a casual awareness. And what I was interested in is the fact that both then and now, the community living in Syria had a lot of connections with Greece. There were expats from the Greek community living in Syria, quite a large population. And these were people who could speak Greek and they could speak Syriac. And so that would speak to the idea that the Quran was written up there in the north. And I think this is going to be another avenue of interest. So that's what I'm planning to explore. There's probably going to be lots of other things as well. I'm interested in the Zamzam well as well at the moment. Yeah. And the mechanics of getting water to the people of Mecca. So that's also going to be a big area of interest.
Wonderful. I'm glad you brought this up because me and Jay are going through recording a video series right now, and one of the topics I will be addressing is the well of Zamzam. And again, I want to let all of my panelists know that I would love to invite each one of you individually into my live stream, my own channel, hopefully starting in January, according to your own schedules. And then at some point, we'll start bringing you also to the studio this way via Zoom, because I want people to really benefit from all of your findings and the research. And it's not really fair for all of you to be together because each one of you have tons of info that our viewers can benefit from. But today, think of it as just a way to introduce your work, introduce the faces behind those names that have been mentioned numerous times. And I'm thankful for all of you, of course. Murad, I'm going to ask you the same question, my friend, which is, what are you doing in 2022? But I want to address this. A question popped up a couple of times here. When we say Muhammad is the praised one, the question is in Arabic, it should have been Al-Muhammad. So I want you to take the time to answer this because I didn't want to respond to that question. It was directed basically to something you brought up. So go ahead.
Yes, you see, when someone says this, he is still thinking 100% Arabic, but it's written Muhammadun Rasulullah. So if you want to translate it like literally in English, it will be praised be the one, not the praised one. So praised be the prophet of God. The Muhammadun is in Arabic we say sifa. It's a descriptive term.
That's right.
So no, you don't need the alif and lam here. You don't need the here. No problem here.
And I would agree with you, because even though one of the names of Allah is Ar-Rahman, no Muslim in the right mind, when you say Rahman, they would gravitate towards someone else. They're always going to think Allah, basically. And that's why even if you use in this case, sifa, as you stated, you are using a description of someone that you don't have to use the definite article sometimes just to do that.
Yes, and also if you look at the name Muhammad, the way it's written, it's very like, if it's for a normal person, it will be very narcissistic. But Jesus Christ, at least he thought to be God, so it fits someone who thinks he is God, not someone.
Jesus knew he had the manifest mind of God because he was God in the flesh. See, you got to know these things, people. Everybody know it.
Who is normal. If you want it to be like a term that's normal, it will be Muhammad. Right. So the one who actually does the praising.
So, my friend, tell us, what are you working on for 2022? Is it the same thing? Is there something you are already researching? Are there things you want to surprise us and keep people anticipating?
Yes, I will look at the Aramaic meaning of the Quran, and I will start with the very small surahs in the back of the Quran, what they really mean. And as a surprise for future audience, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدْ, it's not really Unitarian like people think. It still has a Trinitarian element in it. And this is all cracked through Aramaic.
What? This I'll have to see to believe.
And I want to look also at the names of the surahs, what they actually mean in Aramaic. So I will totally focus on the Aramaic layer. I will not really focus on geography or coins this year, because without the Aramaic meaning of the Quran, like we are lost, you see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Looks like Aramaic is the new way to go these days.
Actually, and you're not going to ask me this, so I'm going to tell you right now. In January, we'll be introducing a whole new paradigm. We're doing research, and I have my team in Britain who are researching this, and they're coming up with even more stuff. Right now, I've just been handed an 85-page research paper that's going to take this even one step further. Not just the Aramaic, it's the whole Syriac contingent that we're going to start introducing in January. We're not just going to look at the language. We're going to start looking at all the practices. We're looking at the beliefs. We're going to be looking at the doctrines. Wait till you see what we have found. And this is all coming out in January. So I want to whet people's appetite, but I don't want to really give it away. It's all going to be complementing what these guys are doing, but even more so, because it's just getting better and better. The more scratch, the more that we scratch, the more that we find. The more that we find, the more that we shine. The more that we shine,
Now, I think he's practiced this little, because he's on a roll here, man. J. Smith, Dr. J. Smith, on a roll. Can you feel the excitement?
The more they whine, oh, how sublime. And this is what all is going to be introduced coming January.
Yeah, I see some whiners in your channel, by the way. We know how to handle the whiners. We give them sheaths, but that's the way we do it. So, Odin, back to you. You are covering the big picture, and you're talking about the Caliph Abdul Malik. And I didn't mean, of course, to cut you off. I wanted just to make sure that everybody else get the chance also to jump in.
And even though this is a live stream, I predict that man with the beard is going to start smoking a pipe sometimes very soon.
Back to you now. What is it about Abdul Malik that you felt like was so damaging to the standard Islamic narrative? And what are you doing in 2022 in relationship to the big picture?
The thing with Abdul Malik is that when you really look into him, into his beliefs, he does not appear as a Muslim. He appears as a sort of demigod, a sort of equivalent to Jesus, to the Messiah who should have come to establish God's kingdom. And everything with Abdul.
But he was a false Christ. I was trying to say this the other day, but all I was saying was like blah blah blah.
Malik is about this. It's about power. He claims to be the equivalent of the Messiah, and he also claims to be the equivalent of the Byzantium emperor. His title, his caliph title, is like the Basileus, kind of Basileus title that the Byzantium emperor bore. In Byzantium, the emperor had power over the religion and politics. And this is exactly what Abdul Malik did. So there is a sort of, he's a sort of mirror image of what's happening in Byzantium. Besides, when we look into it, Abdul Malik bore the title Khalifat Allah and not Khalifat Rasulullah. This is something to be considered. Why is it that we do not find this title Khalifat Rasulullah before the Abbasids? So there are lots of stuff going on with Abdul Malik, and I will keep on working on this topic in the next year. And besides, I will keep on addressing the English-speaking audience. I intend to publish my book in English. I intend also to write an article on the Quran with Dr. Edouard Marie-Gallet, a scientific article which will explain what I call the Nazarene reading of the Quran. Nazarene as Jewish Nazarene, as the Nasara that we found, the Nasara phrase, the Nasara expression that we found in the Quran. It will be a very scientific article telling us about the different people that we find in the Quran, the Kuffar, who are the Kuffars, who are the Nazarenes, who are the people of the books, or people of the book, people of the scripture. And when we really dig into the Quran, we find that those people are not what the standard Islamic narrative tells about. For example, about a little thing about the people of the book. When you just read the Quran for what it is, you see that they are not all the same. It's in Surah 3, verse 113, for example. They are not all the same. There is among the people of the book a standing community. And you see that the Quran here, and also in many other passages, gives us evidence that there was a specific community among the people of the book, the people of the scripture, people of the sacred scriptures of this time, meaning the Jews. There was a good community among them. And so what did they do? I told you about an alliance with the Arab audience. So there will be a big article about this, making all things clear. And I have many other projects. I'm involved in an organization here in France called Mission Ismeri, which is dedicated to helping ex-Muslims, Muslims who converted to Christianity, and dedicated to spreading the gospel to them and also to teaching people about Islam. And I intend to develop a media project with a big studio, a bit like yours, Al-Fadi. But we will address the French and maybe Arab audience. So many good things to come next year.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll get back to you, of course, in a second here about the other question. But Paul, can you also, you were talking about the Jerusalem theory again. What is so damaging in the Jerusalem theory to the standard Islamic narrative, and what are you working on for 2022 in the next few minutes, by the way, that we have here?
what I find is the most. I don't like to think of it as damaging. You know, I don't really want to damage anyone or anything. But what I find is revelatory about the Jerusalem thesis is that the Quran actually makes sense. So much of the Quran, so many Muslims for the last 14 centuries must have sat there scratching their heads saying, why on earth does the Quran say this? Why does it say that? Why is it telling us this story of Dhul-Qarnayn? Why is it telling us the story of Moses and the fish? Why is it telling us this or that? Why was Muhammad going out trying to conquer this place of Mecca? Why was he robbing the caravan trains? Why was he exiling and killing the Jewish tribe? So many questions in the traditional narrative. Where does the elephant come into it? Where does the elephant come from in Surah 105? And why does the Quran bother telling us about this episode, since it seems to have nothing to do with anything else? And what I find is the most revelatory part of the Jerusalem thesis is that the Quran actually makes sense. If one thinks of the instruction, expel them from where they expelled you, and then you put that not in Mecca, but you look at that as Jerusalem, and you look at what was going on at the time that the Quran was reportedly being announced, and you've got the Byzantine-Sasanian War. You've got this attempt in 614 by a party of Jews to re-establish worship at the Jewish temple, and they are expelled from Jerusalem, first of all by the Christian inhabitants and then by the Sasanians. And then you find that the Jews are then expelled from the whole of the Byzantine Empire at the end of the Byzantine-Sasanian War. And yet, what we find, as Mel was saying, all the early references to Muhammad have him leading military operations in Palestine in the 630s, in 634 with Thomas the Presbyter, in 637 the Gospel fragment of the Doctrina Jacobi, and you build up this very clear, I find very clear, very vivid picture of the Quran author inspiring people to fight to recapture Jerusalem at precisely the time that we know that Muhammad was fighting to recapture Jerusalem, and shortly before the Arabs do in fact recapture Jerusalem in 637, 638. So for me, the proof is very much in the pudding. The Quran makes sense if you put it into Jerusalem in a way that it simply doesn't make sense if you have to create story after story after implausible story in order to try and explain what the verses mean. You actually put it within a historical framework, and it makes perfect sense, I find. Or if not perfect sense, it makes an awful lot more sense than the traditional narrative.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. In 1 minute, what are you working on?
Okay, in terms of what I'm working on, I've been working for 3 years on a thematic companion to reading the Quran, where I look at the Quran in 100 different themes, and for each one show which are the relevant verses of the Quran, then how they relate to.
Appear to be contradictory to some of the points that the narrative actually is presenting, and the goal is to help all of us sift through it and find really what sticks and what doesn't. And with that in mind, I'm going to conclude now our part 3 of the podcast, Let Us Reason. Stay tuned for the next part, which will be in few seconds here if you are with us live in studio. This is Al-Fadi, over and out. Thank you.
No way, he's back now.
Okay, guys, this is part 4 of our podcast, Let Us Reason, but this is a continuation of this 2-hour long live stream concerning what we called the historical critique of Islam, introducing the sin sifters. These are the panelists here. Those are the ones that have been pouring out their heart into researching and finding various topics, various evidence, that the standard Islamic narrative, if we were to follow it the way it is, doesn't really at least line up sometimes with some of the findings. Now, there are ways to try to explain that, obviously, and that's what each one of these panelists is doing, taking an angle at this standard Islamic narrative to try to make sense of certain parts of it, and of course, shed some light on other parts as well. Well, we left off last time with Paul, and he mentioned to us about his passion concerning the Jerusalem theory and his interest in writing also, hopefully soon, an academic article to be published concerning that. But with that in mind, I want to now jump to Thomas. Thomas, why don't you tell us about what you will be working on in 2022? And then after you do that as well, go ahead and tell us in your own mind, basically, if you were to compare your own findings to what we call the textual criticism of the New Testament, or at least the Bible in general, what sticks out to you?
Okay, so as for next year, I already mentioned I'm currently working on a book, and I hope to finish it next year. This will also be a big picture book, if you will. It will be pretty long, I fear, but I want to cover basically for a lay audience what the Inara group has published over the last 20 years, more or less. Obviously, it won't go into much detail because they published 10 books, each with 1,000 pages. But I want to put it in terms so that a lay audience can understand it, but it will also include all the references so you can dig deeper if you want to on any particular topic. So this big picture is what really interests me as well. And so last time we talked about, or the others talked about, what they think is like the most damning piece of evidence they're working on, they're finding on this Islamic narrative. And what I think, it's not any individual piece, it's the fact that it all fits together. It's like this big puzzle, and we are making a picture out of it, and it actually works. And that's this Jerusalem hypothesis, it's the Aramaic language in the Quran, it's the Aramaic traditions that we know of in early Christianity. So for example, we know of these Aramaic Christians like Paul of Samosata, who was a bishop of Antioch. And when you look at his beliefs, it's almost the same as what you find in the Quran. And the same going forward, you have Afad, the Persian sage, again, very similar in his beliefs. We find tons of evidence from Aramaic literature. For example, these Alexander Romans that we find in the Quran, which really sticks out a lot. And that doesn't even make a lot of sense to put it in there. But when you know that this is an Aramaic Christian text written sort of as Byzantine propaganda, actually, but then taken by the Arabs, and the Byzantine propaganda part taken out, then you kind of understand where we're coming from. Or the book of the Cave of Treasures, again, very influential in the Quran. So I think it's really this bigger picture that's so fascinating, that all those individual people who are doing research in very different directions, but when they come back with the results, it all fits. I think that's really the best part. Now, as for your question regarding similarities or differences with biblical historical criticism, well, I would say, well, the biblical historical criticism is really where this all comes from. Right? That's when the methodology was developed, and I think unfortunately, it hasn't been applied to Islam as much as to the Bible, because I think we probably would have been a lot further in general, like with this topic, if this had been done earlier. It started out really early, so it started out in the 19th century, early 20th century, but then it really hit the brick wall, and now we're just picking up again from where we left off, like in the 1920s, roughly. So I think it's great that this is happening now, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more and more results.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely. I'm enjoying this, and I hope you take me up on my offer to do a couple of live streams with me where you can unpack many of your findings, of course, because I want people to benefit from that. And of course, for me to add my flavor in terms of my background as well, as it speaks into what you're doing in terms of your research. So thank you so much. I appreciate you, Thomas. Mel, you and I have done a number of shows, but tell us, either, you can take one of two angles or maybe combine them together. The most damaging findings from your perspective concerning sin, or at least when you compare your findings to, for instance, the biblical narrative, what sticks out to you?
Yeah, I will show a slide here on the screen if I may. I don't know if it can come up on my side.
Yep, it's come up.
Just wait for the team to. Okay, I'll just wait for it. Yeah. Okay, so this slide here is where were the stations of Abraham. So in Islam, it declares that Abraham had a station way down in the Hijaz. But if we look at the biblical narrative, and we can dispute where Ur was, but if you look at Haran, Shechem, Beersheba, Jerusalem, Hebron, these are the places that we know were connected with Abraham. There's no biblical support for the idea that Abraham was ever down in the Hijaz. I think that's a big hole in the narrative there. And there is literally no evidence to support the Islamic narrative on that one. They just literally transposed everything down south. If you look at this image here, we know that in the Quran, it seems to be talking with a Jewish and Christian audience, and this is where we find the Jewish and Christian audience. It's basically in the Fertile Crescent, and we see Nestorianism up here, and we have Edessa, and we have obviously Jerusalem and so on. This is really I think, where we would expect the Quran to have come from and where we would expect Islam to have come from. The other thing is, if we think about the conflict at that time, the 7th century, think about the Byzantines and the Persians. They were in conflict there. That was the dividing line between the two sides. And you have the Ghassanids in the west and the Lakhmids in the east, who are both two Arab groups, and they were the buffer zone between the two empires. And really, if you want to ask the question, how did Islam begin? You first of all have to go back to what was the location of the conflict? Well, it was way up here in the north. There was nothing happening way down south in the Hijaz, and this is the center of the drama. So I think that tells its own story. If we look at this, and apologies for the big blue blob, it didn't come out so well here on this. But if you look at this map here, you can see the presence of Aramaic speakers in the 7th century, and then Hebrews there, and Arabic is down here. But if we take into account the fact that the Quran has a lot of not just Aramaic words, but stories that come from the Aramaic tradition, also from the Hebrew tradition, it fits for the Quran to have come from here. I think this image here really tells its own tale. Way down here, the people wouldn't be interacting with all of the various stories that abounded in the Syriac community. So it's an anomaly that should be really obvious to anyone who looks into it. If I take another example, the Nabatean alphabet is a halfway house between Aramaic and Arabic. And of course, the Nabatean alphabet is what the Arabic script came from. So it started out as a cursive form of Nabatean, developed into the Arabic alphabet from the 4th century, which is why Nabatean's letter forms are intermediate between the more northerly Semitic scripts such as Hebrew and those of Arabic. And due to this, it was possible to transliterate from Aramaic to Arabic easily. So when we hear talk about how the Quran was originally in Aramaic, or texts were in Aramaic first and it became the Quran, it makes sense when we take into account the fact that the Arabic script came out of the Nabatean alphabet. Right. And on this slide here, we can see the similarity between the scripts. And it's interesting, even the terminology that we find in the Quran, all the religious terminology, it's either Aramaic or Hebrew. Again, that tells its own tale. It supports the idea that this was in a milieu which was familiar with Christianity and Judaism. You don't find that way down the Hijaz. If we take another example here, we find that the Nabatean script was refined in Hira, which you'll find here. And you'll also notice that all of the Jewish academies are around Hira. And now the Quran makes sense. It's in dialogue with the Christians, it's in dialogue with the Jews. It makes perfect sense up here. It makes no sense down in the Hijaz. And also what's interesting is you have the Manichaeans are in this area, who obviously have a lot of Gnostic influences and so on. So you can see here that Mani started here, back in the...
That means they weren't Trinitarians.
The 3rd century, and Manichaeism spread alongside Islam over the centuries. So that's interesting. And we can see elements of Manichaeism in the Quran as well. So obviously I'm just giving you a bird's eye view, but as you look at the maps, it becomes pretty obvious where Islam began. Here's another map, and it gives you an idea of the Jewish academies. So if we were looking for places where the people who wrote the Quran were interacting, guess number 1 would be here, where the Jewish academies are, and guess number 2 would be over here. You won't find that level of knowledge of Judaism anywhere else but these 2 places in particular. So that's where I'd be expecting the writers behind the Quran to have been interacting with people.
Right. Excellent point.
If I take one more example, if we think about the fact that, is it a coincidence that the Shafi and Hanafi schools developed in the same place and time as the Jewish academies? Now, this is a bit of a muddle of a map there, which I borrowed from the internet, but you can see that in black there, Pumbedita and Surah these are some examples of the Jewish academies, and Hanafi and the Shafi schools started there as well. And what's interesting is they paralleled the Jewish approach. So, for example, the Jews had the Torah and the Mishnah, Muslims had their Quran and the Sunnah, and the same sort of same sort of methodology you find in both. So this paints a northern narrative and not the standard Islamic narrative. And what's also interesting, if we look at this map here, you can see in dark blue is where Greek was spoken at the time, and here's the Hellenized area. And we mentioned earlier that the Alawites viewed the Greek philosophers as prophets. And what's interesting, in the Quran, you find Galen's erroneous embryology. You find Thales' idea that everything is made out of water. These are both Greeks. And you also have references made to reincarnation, which is directly from Greek philosophy. I'm not probably going to go into all of that now, because I'm sure it's a bit too much, but I just show that there as evidence. And
Mel, I want you, brother, just to, if you can, if you want to wrap it up, if you want to focus on one last thing, maybe, just because I want to give time to our remaining guests here, because we have about 10 minutes left.
Yep. So the last point I would say is, again, up north, we have the origin of Al-Fitr. It came from Haran, and I've shown this on a video before, that there's very strong archaeological evidence to support that. So again, it proves that Islam comes from the north. So if you look at the maps, look at the archaeology, I think there's a very strong case for Islam having begun in this milieu up in the north. That's it from me.
Thanks, Mel. Jay?
No, I want to say something at the very end. Go ahead and get all these guys out, and then I want to say and wrap this all up and bring it together.
And by the way, so we have about less than 10 minutes left. So I apologize, Murad, Odin, and Paul, if you can just give us a quick answer to this question about maybe if you compare, your research about the standard Islamic narrative with the New Testament, for instance, or the Bible. Is there something specific that sticks out to you? And then Jay will wrap it up. After we close, please stay with us. We can interact with some of the questions that we've been receiving. So, Murad, if you can start, please.
Okay, just one simple thing. If the Kaaba and Mecca was really the house of Abraham, why didn't ever any Jew or Christian try and invade Mecca, Saudi Arabia? This is one. Now, when it comes with the Bible, every time you see new archaeological finds from Israel confirming the Bible. So actually, I don't believe in the Bible as salvation. I'm not a Christian, but I do believe that it is history. And everything written in it happened in history, and it is carved in stone. And that's it for me.
All right. Thank you. Odin?
Yes, to do it very, very quick, I think we have no evidence to show that the Quran is not an Islamic text. I know this is heresy. People must be saying, what is he uttering here? But when we look at the Quran, we don't see, when we look at the literal text of the Quran, we don't see Islam as much as proto-Islam, as something that came before Islam. And what we understand then is that the Quran is not the source of Islam, but a sort of byproduct. It is a product of Islam. Islam made the Quran out of previous scriptures. And particularly, one can look at the mentions of the word Quran in the Quranic text. And this is something I'm about to unwrap here, but there is a video in preparation with a recording scheduled with Jay, and we will get all the details of this. But what we see in the Quranic text is that the Quran that is designated is not the Islamic Quran, but it is another book, which is not the Islamic Quran. It is an Arabic lectionary, so a religious book, which is not the Quran, which is taken from the mother scripture, the mother kitab. And what is the mother kitab? Yeah. I think it is the Torah. I think those are Jewish scriptures. And we have so evidence in the Quran itself that the Quran, the Quranic text, Quran, is not the Islamic Quran, but another book. And I don't know how the standard Islamic narrative can cope with this.
Yep. Wonderful, wonderful. That's a good way to say it, and also this will be exciting for people to stay tuned for that. Paul, you get the last word before Jay, which you know, Jay always gets the last word.
Hi. It seems to me absolutely obvious, and it should have been obvious from day one, that the Quran is not intended to be read or recited as a standalone document. It is absolutely saturated by biblical references. Some of them are obvious, such as stories and the names of the prophets, and others are far more subtle and are only really now becoming popularly known, where Gabriel Said Reynolds has done fantastic work in tracking biblical turns of phrase in the Quran, and little phrases, little combinations of words that show that it's intended to be read in conjunction with the Torah and the New Testament and the Psalms and other works. So where this all goes is that in order to understand the Quran, you've really got to read it within the context of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the Islamic world very belatedly needs to wake up and start doing this. And they need to start, Muslims need to start reading and learning about the Old Testament and the New Testament and the other parabiblical writings, the Apocryphal Gospels and the Talmud and so on. And they need to start putting the Quran inside that framework. And that's where it's going. And that's where we need to put the Quran where it belongs within this Judeo-Christian tradition, and stop with this nonsensical idea that it's a standalone document revealed in the desert, miles from anywhere, and only explicable by fantastical stories about winged horses and so on.
Yep. Thank you so much, Paul. Fascinating. Jay, you get 3 minutes, my brother, before I wrap it up myself.
Yeah, and I think if you've been listening to what all these fellows have been saying, you notice they're all saying, I'm getting a lot of text coming in, people saying, they're all saying the same thing. Well, lo and behold, if you start to sift all the standard Islamic narrative, what comes out at the end, what is the germ, the gem, the beautiful historical narrative that we are looking for? We're looking for the historical narrative. And when you look at the historical narrative, it goes back to what was actually there in the 7th century. Have you noticed when you pull away all the layers of the Quran, when you pull all the layers of Muhammad's character, when you pull all the layers of Mecca, the book, the man, and the place, when you pull all the layers, you come to what you get at the very end. What you get at the very end, you see a 7th century environment of lots of different sectarian groups, Jewish and Christians, who are in that northern area, not down in the south. They're all up in the north, as Mel has been trying to really emphasize. But take a look and see what was happening there. There was a real internecine confrontation going on because they were waiting for Jesus to return, as Odin has always said. They didn't see Jesus return. Therefore, you're having different groups who are trying to get to ascendancy. When you start to see that ascendancy, who are the ones who are the ascendant? They are the ones, the Arians, who do not believe in Jesus as God. They are the ones that Abdul-Malik introduces.
They're non-Trinitarians do believe that Jesus is God, just not in a separate person of a Trinity.
Confronting the divinity of Jesus, confronting the Trinity, confronting his sonship. And what do? They are the ones that now have to create not only a man, a book, and a place, they've got to then create that identity, which they don't have, but the Jews and the Christians do. And that's why they start to introduce this man, Muhammad. He becomes a man. But what's fascinating, look at the book. The book really shows that there's a problem here, because when you start taking the text and the script out of it, look and see what Luhmann found. Look and see what Luxemburg found. If you take out the harakat, if you take out the ijams, the harakat are the vowels, you take out the ijams, which are the dots. Take out the dots and the vowels, and you go back to the germinal text, you go back to the skeletal text of the Quran itself, you suddenly realize that this comes from another book. This is another book. Are these hymns? Are these lectionaries? Are these homilies that Odin's been talking about? What our good friend Thomas has been talking about? What Luxemburg and Luhling discovered way back in the 1970s. Luhling's got destroyed, thrown out of the university system because of what he discovered 50 years ago, and had to go into obscurity. And that text, when you go and see the text that the Quran comes from, take a look and see what it's all about. It's all about Jesus Christ. Really, the original Quran was all about Jesus. And that's what gets me excited, because what I have been struggling for 40 years, one thing that I've always been asking is, we need to get people back to Jesus. We need to bring the Muslims home. Have you not heard me say this so many times? Right? You've heard me say this for years, because you've been working with me for years. We need to bring Muslims home. And when we bring them home, let's take them away from the Quran that has bastardized these lectionaries. Remember what Odin said. Remember Odin on Surah 23 and Surah 70, when we unpack that. When you look and see this beautiful prayer in Surah 23, that's about the believers, what their duties are, and what's going to happen to the believers, what their rewards are. That beautiful prayer is bastardized in verse 6 and 7 by saying what chastity allows polygamy, and also allows that which your right hand possesses. That's a bastardization of a beautiful prayer that was to Jesus Christ and to believers. That is what the Quran has done. That is what Islam has done. That is what the Prophet Muhammad has done. He has bastardized my Lord. He has bastardized my book, and he has bastardized everything I know to be holy and true. And that's why I want to bring Muslims home. I want to bring them back to Jesus. I want to bring them back to the original Quran, which was all about this man and that place and that book.
Thank you.
You know what? And that's why I'm doing this, because I'm trying to start, what I believe is accomplished a systematic theology based on premillennialism, the fact that Armageddon's over, we're living in a post-apocalyptic world. And my consensus is that by the end of this year, people are going to be left with like, wow, I think that this is getting much worse than I ever dreamed possible, because this is the judgment. And it's time for us to say, so be it, Lord. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to run for the hills again. We're not supposed to draw lines in the sand with our other 60-year-old fat friends with guns and say, bring it on, boys. No. When you get a hint they're coming, start running. Don't die and leave your family to be like, we only had a little bit of food. Because that's what's coming. This money problem and everything else we started for, it's being told for a reason. So I think 3 hours and 50 minutes is enough. Lord willing, I'll hope to see you soon. I don't know when, but until then, you be praying, I'll be praying. We've got to get this figured out, because now we know it's a flat earth nation. Mud flood was Armageddon. I'm never going to tell you anything else. Why would I? I'm trying to prove that I have your best interest at heart. Amen. Hallelujah. Aho.